Story 1. The Hunger Hollow. Marcus Webb had been driving logging trucks through the Appalachian backwoods for 23 years, and he thought he knew every forgotten road and abandoned settlement in eastern Kentucky. His father had worked these same mountains, and his grandfather before that. The Webb family had hauled timber from these hills since the 1940s, back when the coal mines still ran deep and the company towns thrived. Now most of those places were gone, reclaimed by kudzu and time, marked only by crumbling foundations and rusted equipment slowly sinking into the earth. It was late October when Marcus took a contract to haul black walnut from a private timber sale deep in Harlan County. The landowner, an elderly man named Otis Garrett, had given him directions over the phone that involved 3 unmarked turnoffs and a creek crossing that wasn't on any map. Marcus had written everything down carefully, but as he drove his empty flatbed deeper into the mountains that cold Tuesday morning, he began to wonder if he'd missed something. The main highway had given way to a state route, then to a county road, and finally to what could barely be called a road at all. Just 2 parallel ruts of exposed clay winding through dense forest. His GPS had lost signal an hour ago, and his cell phone showed no service. The CB radio picked up nothing but static. He was truly alone in these mountains, as isolated as a person could be in the modern world. Around noon, Marcus stopped at what he thought might be the second unmarked turnoff. A narrow track led off to the right, disappearing into a hollow choked with mountain laurel and rhododendron. The trees here grew different than elsewhere, twisted and bent, their branches reaching across the path like gnarled fingers. He checked his notes again. This had to be it. The truck groaned as he navigated the steep descent into the hollow. The track was barely wide enough for his rig, and branches scraped against both sides of the cab with a sound like fingernails on metal. The temperature seemed to drop as he went deeper, and a mist began to rise from the ground despite the afternoon sun. Something about this place felt wrong, felt old in a way that had nothing to do with the ancient mountains themselves. At the bottom of the hollow, Marcus found the creek crossing, a shallow stream running over flat stones, just as Otis had described. But on the far side, where there should have been a logging site with cut timber ready to load, there was only forest. Dense, primordial forest that looked like it hadn't been touched by human hands in centuries. Marcus climbed from his cab, his boots splashing in the creek water. The air here was thick and still, carrying a smell he couldn't quite identify, something organic and wrong, like meat that had been left out too long. He called out, his voice disappearing into the trees without even an echo. Nothing responded. That's when he saw the buildings. They emerged from the mist gradually, as if they'd been there all along and he'd simply failed to notice them. A cluster of structures stood among the trees on the far side of the creek, weathered wooden buildings with sagging roofs and dark, empty windows. A company town, Marcus realized, one of the old coal mining settlements. But this place wasn't on any map he'd ever seen, and he knew most of them by heart. He should have left then. Every instinct told him to climb back in his truck, turn around, and get out of this hollow. But Marcus had never failed to complete a contract, and he needed to at least confirm that he was in the wrong place. Maybe Otis's timber sale was just past this abandoned town. The buildings seemed to watch him as he walked between them. He counted 8 structures total, 4 houses, what looked like a company store, a building that might have been a schoolhouse, and 2 others whose purposes he couldn't determine. All were constructed in the same style, from the same weathered gray wood with the same empty black windows. No glass remained in any of them. No doors hung in the frames. In the center of the settlement was a well, or what had been a well. The wooden cover had rotted through, leaving a dark opening in the ground surrounded by crumbling stones. Marcus approached it carefully, and as he did, he noticed something that made his skin crawl. The buildings weren't arranged randomly. They formed a perfect circle around the well, each one positioned at an equal distance from the center. He peered into the well's opening. The darkness inside was absolute, deeper than any darkness he'd ever seen. It seemed to pull at his eyes, to draw his gaze down into depths that couldn't possibly exist in these mountains. And from that darkness came a sound, faint but unmistakable. Breathing. Slow, rhythmic breathing, as if something massive slept in the earth below. Marcus stumbled backward, his heart hammering. The mist had grown thicker while he'd been distracted, and now it swirled around the buildings like something alive. And in that mist, he saw movement. Figures emerged from the empty doorways of the houses, not walking out but simply appearing as if they'd been standing in those dark openings all along. They were people, or had been people once. Men, women, and children dressed in clothes from another era, overalls and simple dresses, the kind of garments coal miners and their families might have worn in the 1930s or 40s. But their faces were wrong. Their features were blurred and indistinct, as if someone had tried to sculpt human faces from clay but had gotten the proportions subtly incorrect. And they were all impossibly thin, their limbs like sticks, their bodies wasted away until they were little more than skin stretched over bone. They didn't speak. They simply stood in their doorways and stared at Marcus with eyes that were too large and too dark. And slowly, in perfect unison, they raised their arms toward him in a gesture that might have been supplication or invitation. The breathing from the well grew louder. Marcus ran. He splashed through the creek and threw himself into his truck, his hands shaking so badly he could barely get the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, and he threw the transmission into reverse, not caring about the scratches the branches would leave on his paint job, not caring about anything except getting out of this hollow. The truck lurched backward up the steep track. In his mirrors, Marcus saw the figures emerging from the mist, walking toward him with that same eerily synchronized movement. They weren't hurrying, but they covered ground impossibly fast, gliding more than walking. And behind them, the mist itself seemed to be following, rolling up the hollow like a living thing. His rear tires found purchase on the main track, and Marcus spun the wheel, bringing the truck around. He jammed the accelerator to the floor and the empty flatbed bounced wildly over the rutted road. Behind him, the mist boiled out of the hollow, and in it he could see more figures now, dozens of them, all with those wrong faces, all reaching toward his retreating truck with skeletal hands. The breathing had become a roar that shook the ground. Marcus didn't slow down until he reached the county road, and he didn't stop until he saw other vehicles and buildings and signs of normal human life. When he finally pulled over at a gas station in Harlan, his hands were still shaking. He tried calling Otis Garrett, but the number was disconnected. He tried looking up the timber sale online, but he could find no record of it anywhere. That night, in a motel room with the lights on and the door locked and chained, Marcus researched abandoned coal towns in Harlan County. He found references to dozens of them, settlements that had been emptied out when the mines closed, their residents scattered to other towns or other states. But he found nothing about a town where he'd been, nothing about a settlement arranged in a circle around a well. He did find something else, though, stories from the 1930s about a company town that had disappeared. Not been abandoned, but disappeared. One day it was marked on state maps and census records, home to 127 people. The next, it was gone. The few people who claimed to have looked for it found only empty forest. The mining company denied such a town had ever existed, and eventually the whole incident was forgotten. The stories mentioned a name, Hunger Hollow. According to local legend, something had lived in those mountains long before the coal companies arrived, something that dwelled deep in the earth and demanded tribute. The mining company had drilled too deep, awakened something that should have remained asleep, and paid a terrible price. Marcus never went back to those mountains. He sold his truck, moved to Tennessee, and took a job driving local routes that kept him far from the deep hollows of eastern Kentucky. But sometimes, late at night, he thinks he can still hear it, that slow, rhythmic breathing rising from some impossible depth. And he wonders about those figures, those wasted people standing in their doorways. Had they been residents of that vanished town? Were they still there, trapped in that hollow, waiting for someone to disturb the thing that breathed in the darkness below? He wonders, but he'll never go back to find out. Some places in the Appalachian Mountains exist outside of normal time and space, existing in pockets of wrongness where the rules of the world don't quite apply. Hunger Hollow is one of those places, and Marcus knows with absolute certainty that he was never meant to leave it. Whatever lives at the bottom of that well wanted to add him to its collection of hollow-eyed servants. Marcus was lucky. He escaped, but he knows his luck won't hold if he ever goes back. And late at night, when sleep won't come, he thinks about other drivers taking wrong turns in those mountains, following old directions into forgotten hollows. He wonders how many of them find what he found, and he wonders how many of them make it out. Story 2. The Passenger. Sarah Chen had driven for Mountain Express Transport for 6 years, hauling freight through the Appalachian corridor from Georgia to Pennsylvania. She preferred night driving. The roads were emptier, the truck stops quieter, and something about the darkness and the rhythm of the highway helped her think. Her husband didn't understand it, didn't see the appeal of spending 12 hours alone in a cab rolling through the mountains, but Sarah found a kind of peace there that she found anywhere else. It was a Wednesday night in March when she picked up the passenger. Sarah was northbound on Route 23 through Virginia, hauling automotive parts to a distribution center in Roanoke. The weather had been clear when she started her run, but as she climbed into the mountains, a fog had rolled in, thick and gray and clinging to the highway like cobwebs. Her headlights barely penetrated it, reducing her visibility to maybe 50 feet. She just passed through a small town called Pound when she saw the figure standing on the shoulder. A woman in a pale dress, thumb out, face turned toward the approaching truck. Sarah's first instinct was to ignore her. Company policy strictly forbade picking up hitchhikers, and besides, what kind of person would be hitchhiking alone on a mountain highway at 2 in the morning? But as she drew closer, Sarah saw the woman more clearly in her headlights. She was young, maybe 25, with long dark hair and a white sundress that seemed far too light for the cold March night. And she was soaking wet, as if she'd been standing in the rain, though it hadn't rained all day. The woman's eyes met Sarah's through the windshield, and something in that gaze made Sarah's foot ease off the accelerator. She told herself she was just going to check if the woman needed help, maybe call the police for her. Nothing more. Sarah pulled the truck onto the shoulder about 20 yards past the hitchhiker and set her air brakes. In her mirror, she watched the woman walk toward the cab, moving with an odd, gliding gait that didn't quite look natural. Sarah rolled down her window as the woman approached. Up close, she looked even younger with pale skin and dark eyes that seemed too large for her face. Water dripped from her hair and dress, forming puddles on the pavement. "You need help," Sarah called down. "You want me to call someone?" The woman smiled, and her teeth were very white in the darkness. "I need a ride," she said. Her voice was soft, almost musical. "Just up the road. To Coeburn, it's not far." Every rational part of Sarah's brain screamed at her to refuse, to drive away, to follow company policy and basic common sense. But something else overrode those instincts, something she couldn't quite identify. Before she fully realized what she was doing, Sarah heard herself say, "Get in." The woman climbed into the cab with surprising ease, settling into the passenger seat and fastening her seatbelt. Up close, Sarah could smell her, not the musty smell of wet cloth and rain she'd expected, but something else. Something organic and wrong, like stagnant water and rotting vegetation. The woman's dress left dark, wet marks on the seat. "Thank you," the woman said, still smiling. "I've been waiting so long." Sarah released the air brakes and pulled back onto the highway. The fog seemed to have grown even thicker, pressing against the windshield like a living thing. "How'd you end up out here?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual. "Car trouble. Something like that," the woman said. She turned to look at Sarah, and in the dim glow of the dashboard lights, her eyes reflected with an odd greenish cast, like an animal's eyes caught in headlights. "I had an accident a long time ago." Sarah's hands tightened on the steering wheel. The temperature in the cab had dropped noticeably since the woman climbed in, and Sarah could see her own breath now pluming in the cold air. "How long ago?" 1952, the woman said, and smiled wider. Sarah's blood went cold. She wanted to look at her passenger to see if she was joking, but she couldn't take her eyes off the road. The fog had become so thick that she could barely see the white line marking the edge of the highway. "That's not funny," she said, her voice strained. "I'm not trying to be funny," the woman replied. Her voice had changed, becoming hollow and distant, as if she were speaking from the bottom of a well. "I was going home from a dance. My boyfriend was driving. We were arguing about something. I can't remember what anymore. He lost control on a curve. The car went through the guardrail and into the creek. The water was so cold and dark. I tried to get out, but my dress got caught on something. I could see the moonlight through the water, but I couldn't reach it." Sarah risked a glance at her passenger. The woman was staring straight ahead, her face expressionless. Water now pouring from her hair and dress in streams, pooling on the floor of the cab. "I'm calling the police," Sarah said, reaching for her CB radio. The woman's hand shot out and grabbed Sarah's wrist. Her grip was ice cold and impossibly strong, and her fingers felt wrong, too long, too flexible, more like tentacles than human digits. "Don't," she said, and now her voice held an edge of something darker, something that made every primitive part of Sarah's brain scream in terror. "I just want to go home, that's all, just take me home." "Where?" Sarah gasped, trying to pull her wrist free. The woman's grip tightened and pain shot up Sarah's arm. "Where do you want to go?" "You'll know," the woman said. "It's coming up, on the right, you'll know it when you see it." The fog suddenly cleared, and Sarah found herself on a stretch of highway she didn't recognize. This was Route 23. The road was narrower, older, with crumbling pavement and no shoulder. Ancient trees pressed close on both sides, their branches reaching over the road to form a canopy that blocked out the sky. And ahead, see something that made her stomach lurch with dread. A guardrail, twisted and broken, with a gap where something had smashed through. Beyond it, the ground dropped away into darkness. "There," the woman said, releasing Sarah's wrist and pointing at the gap. "That's where it happened. That's where I went into the water, but I never came out. I'm still down there, Sarah. I've always been down there, and now you're going to join me." Sarah slammed on the brakes, but nothing happened. The pedal went to the floor without resistance, as if it weren't connected to anything. She tried the engine brake, nothing. The steering wheel spun uselessly in her hands. The truck was accelerating, drawn toward that gap in the guardrail as if pulled by invisible cables. The woman was laughing now, a wet, gurgling sound like water running down a drain. Her face had changed, becoming bloated and fish belly white, her eyes bulging from their sockets. Her mouth opened impossibly wide, revealing not teeth but something else, writhing, lamprey like rings of smaller mouths, all filled with needle-sharp fangs. "I've been waiting so long," the thing said in that hollow, drowned voice. "So many years at the bottom of the creek, watching the headlights pass above, waiting for someone to stop, waiting for someone to take me home, and now you have. Now we'll both rest in the cold water, forever." The truck was 10 feet from the gap when Sarah did the only thing she could think of. She unbuckled her seatbelt, twisted in her seat, and kicked the passenger door open with both feet. Then she grabbed the thing that had been a woman and shoved with all her strength. The creature shrieked, a sound like metal tearing, and tumbled out of the cab, hitting the pavement and rolling. The instant it left the truck, everything changed. The brakes responded, the steering wheel locked into place, and Sarah was able to bring the truck to a shuddering stop just inches from the broken guardrail. She sat there for several minutes, gasping for breath, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. When she finally looked in her mirrors, she saw nothing but empty highway behind her. The fog had lifted and she was back on Route 23 exactly where she should be. The broken guardrail was gone. The ancient trees were gone. Everything was normal except for the passenger seat. It was still wet, water dripping from the upholstery onto the floor. And in that water, Sarah could see strands of long, dark hair. And something else, small white objects that looked disturbingly like teeth. Sarah drove the rest of the way to Roanoke without stopping. She delivered her load, submitted her paperwork, and then spent 3 hours in a truck wash, running every cleaning solution they had through her cab. The water stains never came out. She researched the area later, digging through newspaper archives. In July 1952, a car had gone off Route 23 near Pound, Virginia, plunging into a creek. The driver survived, but his girlfriend, a girl named Rebecca Marsh, had drowned. Her body wasn't recovered for 3 days. The newspaper article included a photograph of Rebecca. She was wearing a white sundress in the picture, and she had long, dark hair. Sarah still drives for Mountain Express, but she never works that route anymore. She requested a transfer to runs that keep her out of Virginia entirely, and her supervisors granted it without asking questions. She never told them why, never reported what happened that night. Who would believe her? But sometimes, late at night, when she's driving through the mountains, Sarah checks her mirrors obsessively. She watches for figures standing on the shoulder, watches for hitchhikers with their thumbs out. And if she ever sees one, especially a woman in a pale dress, she'll drive past without slowing down. She knows now that some passengers have destinations that have nothing to do with geography, places where the living aren't meant to go. Rebecca Marsh has been waiting since 1952, waiting at the bottom of a cold, dark creek for someone to take her home. And Sarah knows that she'll keep waiting, keep climbing into the cabs of drivers foolish enough to stop, keep trying to drag them down into the water where she dwells. The mountains of Appalachia hold many secrets, many hungry ghosts that refuse to rest. Sarah was lucky. She escaped. But she knows that somewhere in those mountains, another driver will stop someday. Another driver will offer a ride to a woman in a white dress, and that driver might not be as lucky as she was. Story 3. The Broadcast. Tommy Blackwood had been a long-haul trucker for 15 years, running loads from Texas to Maine and everywhere in between. He was used to the solitude, the endless highways, the strange parade of truck stops and rest areas that all blurred together after enough years on the road. What he wasn't used to was the broadcast he picked up one night in the mountains of West Virginia. It was early November, around 3 in the morning, and Tommy was hauling electronics through the New River Gorge on Route 19. The night was clear and cold, with a full moon hanging over the mountains like a spotlight. His CB radio crackled with the usual chatter, truckers warning each other about speed traps, weather conditions, and road hazards. Tommy half listened while he drove, his mind elsewhere, his daughter's birthday coming up and whether he'd be home in time for it. That's when he heard the voice. It came through on Channel 19, the standard trucker channel, but it cut through all the other chatter like a knife. A man's voice, calm and measured, with a strange accent Tommy couldn't quite place. It sounded old-fashioned somehow, like radio announcers from the 1940s. "Attention all travelers on Route 19 northbound," the voice said. "Please be advised that the bridge at mile marker 47 will collapse at 3:22 a.m. I repeat, the bridge at mile marker 47 will collapse at 3:22 a.m. Recommend immediate detour. This is not a drill." Tommy glanced at his clock, 3:14 a.m. He checked his GPS. He was approaching mile marker 43. If what the voice said was true, he had about 8 minutes before he reached the bridge and another 4 minutes before it supposedly collapsed. Other truckers on the CB were already responding. Who was that? Some kind of joke. This is an emergency channel, asshole, not for pranks. Tommy keyed his mic. This is Blackwood Transport northbound on 19. Anyone know anything about a bridge problem at mile marker 47? Silence. Then another driver responded. Negative, Blackwood. I just went over that bridge 20 minutes ago. Solid as a rock. Somebody's messing around. Tommy should have agreed, should have dismissed it as some bored kid with a radio. But something about that voice bothered him. It had sounded so certain, so specific. Not like someone making a prank call, but like someone issuing a genuine warning. He was at mile marker 45 when the voice came through again. 7 minutes until bridge collapse. Mile marker 47. Please exit the highway immediately. Take the detour at mile marker 46. There is still time. This time Tommy could hear something in the background of the transmission. A strange sound like wind chimes, but deeper, more resonant. And underneath that, something else. Voices, maybe, speaking in whispers too low to make out individual words. Mile marker 46 approached, and Tommy saw the exit, a small state route leading off into the mountains. In 15 years of driving, he'd learned to trust his instincts, and every instinct he had was screaming at him to take that exit. He slowed down and pulled off the highway. In his mirrors, he could see other trucks continuing north, their lights disappearing into the darkness. He keyed his CB again. This is Blackwood Transport. I'm taking the detour at 46. Anyone else? You're an idiot, Blackwood, someone responded. That bridge is fine. We're adding an hour to your drive for nothing. Tommy almost got back on the highway, but instead he followed the state route as it curved away from Route 19, climbing into the hills. His clock read 3:19 a.m. At 3:22 a.m. exactly, Tommy heard it. Even from miles away, even over the sound of his engine, he heard it. A sound like thunder, like the world itself breaking. He pulled over immediately, killed his engine, and listened. In the distance, he could hear sirens starting up, faint but growing louder. He tried his CB. This is Blackwood Transport. What's happening on Route 19? Can anyone hear me? Static. Then after a long moment, a shaken voice. The bridge is gone. Jesus Christ, the bridge is gone. It just collapsed. There were vehicles on it. I saw the lights go down. Oh God, they went down into the gorge. Tommy sat in his cab, his hands shaking, his heart racing. The voice on the radio had been right. Somehow, impossibly, it had been right. But who had issued the warning? How had they known? He tried calling out on the CB. This is Blackwood Transport. Whoever issued that warning, please respond. You saved lives tonight. Please identify yourself. Nothing. Just static and the panic chatter of truckers and emergency responders dealing with the disaster on Route 19. Tommy continued on the detour, eventually rejoining the highway north of the collapse. By the time he passed the scene, emergency vehicles had arrived in force. He could see lights down in the gorge, far below the highway, rescue crews searching for survivors. The news later reported that 4 vehicles had been on the bridge when it fell. 3 people died. It would have been more if not for the mysterious warning that had caused several truckers, including Tommy, to detour. He figured that would be the end of it. A strange incident, inexplicable but finished. He was wrong. 3 months later, Tommy was driving through eastern Tennessee on I-40 hauling machine parts to Knoxville. It was late at night again, around 2 in the morning when the voice came through his CB. Attention all travelers on I-40 westbound. Please be advised that there will be a multi-vehicle accident at mile marker 352 at 2:47 a.m. Black ice will form on the bridge. Recommend reduced speed or detour. This is not a drill. Tommy's blood went cold. It was the same voice, the same measured tone, the same old-fashioned accent. And in the background, that same sound, wind chimes and whispered voices. He was eastbound, so the warning didn't apply to him, but he immediately keyed his mic. All westbound traffic on I-40 is Blackwood Transport. Recommend extreme caution at mile marker 352. Watch for ice on the bridge. The responses came back skeptical, dismissive. It was February, but the night was relatively warm, above freezing. Black ice seemed unlikely. Tommy pulled off at the next exit and waited, listening to his CB. At 2:47 a.m., the chatter exploded. "We've got a pileup at mile marker 352. Multiple vehicles. Need emergency services immediately." It had happened again. Over the next 2 years, Tommy heard the broadcast 7 more times. Each time, the voice would come through his CB radio late at night, always with a specific warning: a bridge collapse, an accident, a landslide, a chemical spill. Each time, the warning included an exact location and time, and each time it came true. Tommy started trying to communicate with the voice, tried to find out who was issuing these warnings and how they knew. He researched radio frequencies, consulted with ham radio enthusiasts, even spoke to a physics professor about the possibility of receiving transmissions from the future. No one could explain it. The professor did point out something interesting, though. All of the warnings had occurred in the Appalachian region: West Virginia, Tennessee, Kentucky, Virginia, North Carolina. It was as if whatever was generating these broadcasts was geographically limited to the mountain range. Tommy became obsessed. He started driving routes through Appalachia almost exclusively, always with his CB radio on, always listening. He recorded every broadcast, built a database of warnings. The pattern was consistent: late night, specific location, exact time, always accurate. He noticed other patterns too. The background sounds varied, but they were always there, those wind chimes and whispers. And sometimes, if he turned the volume up high enough, he thought he could almost make out what the whispers were saying. They sounded like names, hundreds of names being recited in an endless list. It was on a night in September, driving through the mountains of Virginia, when Tommy finally got his answer. The voice came through at 1:30 a.m. "Attention all travelers on Route 58 eastbound. Please be advised that a tractor trailer will experience brake failure at mile marker 73 at 2:15 a.m. Vehicle will cross the median and cause a head-on collision. Recommend detour or extreme caution." This is not a drill. Tommy was on Route 58 eastbound, approaching mile marker 7, driving a tractor trailer. His mouth went dry as he checked his brakes. They seemed fine, responding normally, but the warning had never been wrong. He immediately pulled off the highway and called his company's maintenance line. "I need a full brake inspection right now," he said. "I don't care that it's the middle of the night. Get someone out here." It took 3 hours for a mobile mechanic to arrive. When he inspected Tommy's brakes, he found a critical failure in the hydraulic line, a slow leak that would have resulted in complete brake failure within the next hour of driving. Tommy would have lost his brakes going downhill at high speed, right around mile marker 73. "How the hell did you know?" the mechanic asked. "There's no warning light for this kind of failure. You couldn't have felt anything wrong." Tommy couldn't answer. He was thinking about the warning, about the voice on the radio, about the whispered names in the background. That night, back in his motel room, Tommy did more research. He focused on disasters in the Appalachian region, particularly transportation accidents. What he found made his blood run cold. In 1967, the Silver Bridge connecting West Virginia and Ohio had collapsed during rush hour, killing 46 people. In 1972, a coal slurry impoundment had failed in West Virginia, flooding a valley and killing 125 people. In 1985, a bus accident in Kentucky had killed 27 people, most of them children. The list went on and on: dozens of disasters, hundreds of deaths, stretching back decades. Tommy looked at the locations of these historical disasters and compared them to the locations where he'd received warnings. They were close, always within a few miles. It was as if the broadcasts were emanating from the sites of past tragedies. He thought about those whispered names in the background of each transmission. Names of the dead, he realized. The voice wasn't coming from the future. It was coming from the past, from the ghosts of people who had died in these mountains, trying to prevent others from suffering the same fate. But why and how? Tommy never found a definitive answer. He continued to receive the warnings, continued to pass them along to other drivers, continued to save lives. Over time, other truckers started to believe him, started to listen when Tommy Blackwood said he'd received a warning. The voice became known among Appalachian truckers as the Guardian. No one knew who or what it was, but everyone knew it was real, and everyone knew it was trying to help. Some drivers claimed to have heard it themselves. Others relied on Tommy to relay the warnings. Tommy is older now, close to retirement. He still drives the Appalachian routes, still keeps his CB radio on, still listens for that calm, measured voice with its impossible knowledge. He knows he's been chosen somehow, selected to receive these messages and act on them. He doesn't know why he was chosen, but he's accepted it as his responsibility. He thinks about the people he saved, the drivers who took detours, who slowed down, who avoided disaster because of warnings from beyond the grave. He thinks about the people he couldn't save, the times when the warning came too late or wasn't heeded. And he wonders if, when his own time comes, his voice will join that chorus of whispers in the background of the broadcasts. Will he become one of the guardians, watching over these treacherous mountain roads, trying to protect the living from the dangers that claimed him? Tommy doesn't fear death anymore. He's heard the voices of the dead, and they aren't angry or resentful. They're trying to help. They're trying to make sure that others don't suffer as they did. The mountains of Appalachia are old and dangerous, with roads that twist through valleys where the sun barely reaches and passes where one wrong move can mean death. But those mountains are also watched over by something that cares, something that tries to warn and protect. Tommy Blackwood listens for those warnings, and when they come, he acts, because he knows that the dead of Appalachia haven't forgotten the living. They're still there, still watching, still trying to save lives from beyond the grave. And sometimes late at night, when the roads are empty and the moon is full, Tommy keys his CB radio and speaks into the darkness. "Thank you for all of it, thank you." The only response is static and the sound of wind chimes and whispered names, but Tommy knows they hear him. The guardians of the Appalachian roads are always listening. Story 4: The Mining Town. Dale Hutchins had been transporting mining equipment through the Appalachian coal fields for 12 years, and he prided himself on knowing these mountains as well as anyone. His routes took him through western Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and eastern Kentucky, through regions where coal had been king and whole towns had risen and fallen with the fortunes of the mines. He delivered machinery to operations both large and small, had seen the scars that deep mining left on the land, and had watched as communities struggled to survive after the coal companies moved on. It was late April when Dale got the contract that would change everything. A small operation in McDowell County, West Virginia, needed a replaced motor for their shaft elevator. The equipment weighed 6 tons and had to be delivered within 48 hours, or the mine would be forced to shut down, costing the company hundreds of thousands of dollars. Dale's dispatcher had been vague about the exact location, just a set of GPS coordinates and instructions to follow Route 52 to a marker labeled Thornton Mine Road. Dale set out from Charleston on a Thursday evening, planning to drive through the night and make the delivery by morning. The route took him deep into the southern coal fields, through country that had once been prosperous but now showed the wear of economic decline. He passed through towns that were half empty, their main streets lined with boarded-up storefronts and abandoned houses. The mines had been closing for decades, and the people had been leaving almost as long. Around midnight, Dale's GPS began acting strangely. The signal would drop out for minutes at a time, then return showing him in the wrong location entirely. He was forced to navigate by his printed directions and the mile markers along Route 52. The mountains here were steep and thickly forested, and the road wound through valleys where the moonlight barely penetrated. He found Thornton Mine Road around 1:30 in the morning. It was barely more than a gravel track leading off Route 52, marked by a faded wooden sign that was almost invisible in the darkness. Dale downshifted and turned onto the road, his truck's headlights illuminating a narrow path that climbed steeply up the mountainside. The road was in terrible condition, full of potholes and washouts that forced Dale to crawl along at barely 10 miles per hour. Tree branches scraped against both sides of his trailer, and more than once he had to stop and back up to navigate particularly tight curves. He'd been on bad roads before, but this one seemed almost deliberately difficult, as if it were trying to discourage visitors. After 45 minutes of climbing, Dale reached a plateau and found himself looking at something he hadn't expected: a town. It sat in a small valley on top of the mountain, a cluster of buildings arranged along a central street. Dale could see maybe 20 structures, houses, a company store, what looked like a church or meeting hall. At the far end of the street stood the mine entrance itself, a dark opening in the mountainside framed by a wooden structure that held the hoist machinery. But something was wrong. Despite the directions indicating that this was an active mining operation, Dale saw no lights, no vehicles, no signs of activity. The buildings all appeared abandoned, their windows dark and empty. And the architecture was wrong, too old, styles from the 1920s or 30s, not the kind of structures a modern mining operation would use. Dale brought his truck to a stop in the middle of the main street and sat there for a moment, confused. Had he made a wrong turn somewhere? But no, this had to be the right place. The road had led here directly, and there was clearly a mine. He climbed down from his cab, his boots crunching on gravel that seemed undisturbed by vehicle traffic in years. The air was cold and still, carrying a smell that Dale recognized from other abandoned mining sites, a combination of rust, rot, and that particular chemical odor that coal mines develop over time. "Hello," Dale called out. His voice echoed off the buildings and died away into silence. No one answered. He walked down the main street, his flashlight beam sweeping across the structures. The houses were small, identical company-built units that coal operations had used to house workers in the early 20th century. Most had their doors standing open or missing entirely. Through the dark windows, Dale could see remnants of furniture, a table here, a chair there, all covered in decades of dust. The company store was larger, a 2-story building with a covered porch running along its front. Dale climbed the steps, which creaked alarmingly under his weight, and shone his light through the windows. Inside, he could see shelves still stocked with goods, canned food, tools, work clothes. Everything was covered in dust and cobwebs, but the items were all still there, as if the store had been abandoned in the middle of a normal business day. This was impossible. No mining company would have given him directions to an abandoned site. There had to be an active mine here somewhere, a modern operation that just happened to be near this ghost town. But as Dale continued down the street, he found no evidence of any modern construction. The entire town appeared frozen in time, preserved exactly as it had been decades ago when it was abandoned. He reached the mine entrance and stopped. The wooden hoist structure loomed above him, and he could see the massive wheel that had once held the cable for raising and lowering the elevator cage. But the equipment was ancient, rusted through in places, clearly non-functional. Dale shone his flashlight into the mine entrance itself. The shaft descended into absolute darkness, the kind of darkness that seems to swallow light rather than simply absorb it. Dale saw remnants of rail tracks leading into the opening, and the walls of the shaft were shored up with timbers that looked ready to collapse. A sign hung at the entrance, barely readable: Thornton Mine S 1923, danger no entry. That's when Dale heard the sound. It came from deep in the mine, echoing up from the shaft, a rhythmic clanging like metal striking stone. Pickaxes, he realized, the sound of pickaxes hitting coal. Dale's blood went cold. There couldn't be anyone working down there. The mine was clearly abandoned, the equipment non-functional. But the sound continued, regular and persistent, the sound of men working underground. He should have left then. Every rational part of his mind told him to get back in his truck and drive away, to call his dispatcher and report that he'd been given bad directions. But something kept him there, some combination of curiosity and disbelief. "Hello," Dale called down into the shaft. "Is anyone down there? I'm looking for the mine supervisor." The pickaxe sound stopped. For a moment there was only silence. Then Dale heard something else, footsteps coming up from the depths. Slow, steady footsteps, accompanied by a strange scraping sound like something being dragged along the ground. Dale backed away from the mine entrance, his heart pounding. The footsteps grew louder, closer. And then he saw them. They emerged from the darkness of the mine shaft one by one, men in mining gear, wearing overalls and hard hats with carbide lamps. Their faces were blackened with coal dust, their clothes stiff and dark with grime. They walked in single file, moving with a strange, mechanical precision, their eyes fixed straight ahead. But these weren't living men. Dale knew that immediately, knew it with a certainty that bypassed all rational thought. Their movements were wrong, too stiff and jerky, like puppets being controlled by inexpert hands. And their eyes, when the carbide lamps illuminated them, were empty, reflecting the light with a flat, dead sheen like the eyes of fish. More and more emerged from the mine, dozens of them forming a line that stretched back into the darkness. They filed out into the main street of the town, and as they did, the buildings around Dale began to change. Lights flickered on in windows. Smoke began to rise from chimneys. The sound of voices and music drifted on the air, a phonograph playing somewhere, children laughing, a woman singing. The town was coming to life around him. But it wasn't a normal life, wasn't the warm bustle of a living community. It was a grotesque pantomime, a reenactment of life performed by things that had forgotten how to be human. Dale ran. He sprinted back toward his truck, his boots pounding on the gravel. Behind him, he could hear the miners following, their footsteps echoing in unison, that same mechanical precision. He threw himself into his cab, started the engine, and threw the transmission into reverse. The truck lurched backward, and Dale spun the wheel, trying to turn around on the narrow street. In his headlights, he could see the miners approaching, dozens of them now, all moving with that same awful coordination. And between them walked other figures, women in old-fashioned dresses, children in clothes from another era, shopkeepers in aprons and sleeve garters. The entire town had come alive, or what passed for alive. Every resident of Thornton, every person who had lived and worked and died in this place, was walking toward him. Dale got the truck turned around and slammed the accelerator. The tires spun on the gravel, then caught, and the truck lurched forward. He barreled down the main street, past the advancing crowd, toward the road that led down the mountain. In his mirrors, he could see them following, running now, moving faster than any human should be able to move. Their faces were pressed into expressions that might have been rage or hunger or something else entirely, something that had no human equivalent. The truck hit the downward slope of the road, and Dale let gravity and momentum carry him. Branches whipped against the cab and potholes jarred his teeth, but he didn't slow down. Behind him, the pursuing crowd fell away, unable to keep pace with the vehicle. But even after they were out of sight, Dale could still hear them. Voices carried on the wind, calling out to him in words he couldn't understand. And underneath those voices, that rhythmic clanging, pickaxes striking coal, the eternal work of the dead miners continuing in the darkness below the mountain. Dale didn't stop until he reached Route 52. He pulled over, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold the steering wheel. He tried calling his dispatcher, but his phone had no signal. He tried the CB radio, but it picked up only static, and faintly underneath the static, the sound of pickaxes. As the sun rose, Dale sat in his truck and tried to make sense of what had happened. He looked at his paperwork again, at the GPS coordinates and the delivery instructions. Everything seemed legitimate. But when he pulled up the coordinates on his phone's map, they didn't show a mine. They didn't show anything at all, just blank space, as if that part of the mountain didn't exist on any map. Dale drove back to Charleston and reported to his dispatcher that he'd been unable to find the delivery location. The dispatcher was confused. The client had confirmed the address, the GPS coordinates, everything. But when they tried to call the mine, the number was disconnected. When they tried to look up the company, they found no record of it existing. The hoist motor was eventually returned to the manufacturer, the delivery canceled, the contract voided. Dale was told to forget about it, to chalk it up to some kind of administrative error. But he couldn't forget. He researched Thornton Mine and found references in historical archives. It had been a small coal operation that opened in 1923 and closed in 1947 after a catastrophic tunnel collapse killed 47 miners. The town had been abandoned shortly after, the residents moving away to find work elsewhere. The road to the town had been deliberately damaged to prevent access, and the mine entrance had been sealed. But Dale had been there. He'd seen the town, seen the mine entrance standing open, seen the miners emerge from the depths. Whatever had happened in 1947, whatever tragedy had closed the Thornton mine, it had left something behind. Something that continued to work in the darkness, that continued to live out the routines of a community long dead. Dale doesn't drive in McDowell County anymore. He refuses contracts that would take him into that part of West Virginia. When other drivers ask him why, he just says the roads are too bad, too dangerous. He doesn't tell them about Thornton, about the miners who still work the coal seam, about the town that exists in some pocket of the past, forever replaying its final days. Because Dale knows the truth now. The Appalachian Mountains are full of abandoned mines, ghost towns, places where tragedy occurred and was never fully resolved. And some of those places don't stay abandoned. Some of them continue, trapped in endless repetition, waiting for the living to stumble into their midst. Dale was lucky. He escaped. But he wonders about other drivers, other people who might follow GPS coordinates to places that don't exist on maps. He wonders if they find what he found. And he wonders if they all get out. Story 5. The Fog People. Jennifer Price had been driving delivery routes through the Smoky Mountains for 8 years, shuttling packages between Knoxville and Asheville along the winding mountain highways. She knew every scenic overlook, every hairpin turn, every section where fog could roll in without warning and reduce visibility to near zero. The fog was just a fact of life in these mountains, something drivers learned to navigate carefully. But the fog Jennifer encountered on a November morning was different from anything she'd experienced before. She'd left Knoxville at 4 a.m. with a trailer full of medical supplies bound for Asheville. The weather forecast had called for clear skies, and the first hour of her drive had been uneventful. Empty highway, stars overhead, the dark bulk of the mountains rising on either side. She made this run hundreds of times and could almost drive it in her sleep. Around 5:30, as she climbed into the higher elevations, Jennifer noticed the fog. It appeared suddenly, without the gradual buildup she was used to. One moment the road was clear, the next she was driving through a wall of gray that pressed against her windshield like something solid. She slowed immediately, turned on her fog lights and crept forward at 30 miles per hour. This fog was strange. It had a yellowish tint, almost sulfurous, and it moved in ways that fog shouldn't move. Instead of drifting lazily across the road, it seemed to pulse and swirl with deliberate purpose, forming shapes that almost looked like figures before dissolving back into formless gray. Jennifer had driven through plenty of mountain fog, but this made her uneasy. Something about it felt wrong, felt unnatural. She considered pulling over and waiting for it to clear, but she was on a tight schedule. The medical supplies had to reach Asheville by 9 a.m. She pressed on. That's when she saw the first figure standing by the roadside. It appeared in her headlights without warning, a person standing on the shoulder, completely motionless. Jennifer's first thought was that someone's car had broken down, and she instinctively began to slow. But as she drew closer, her foot moved from the brake to the accelerator. The figure was wrong. It stood perfectly still, not waving for help or showing any reaction to the approaching truck. And its proportions were off somehow, too tall and too thin, with limbs that seemed slightly too long for its body. The fog swirled around it, and Jennifer couldn't make out any features. No face, no details, just a silhouette standing impossibly still. She accelerated past it, her heart pounding. In her side mirror, she watched the figure recede into the fog. It hadn't moved, hadn't turned to watch her pass. It simply stood there like a statue. Jennifer tried her CB radio. "This is Mountain Medical Transport on Route 441 northbound. Anyone else driving through this fog? Just checking conditions." Static answered her. No other drivers, no chatter, just empty static. That was unusual. Even in the morning, there were usually at least a few truckers on this route. Another figure appeared ahead, this one standing in the middle of the road. Jennifer gasped and swerved, her tires squealing. The figure didn't move, didn't react, and she missed it by inches. In the split second as she passed, she tried to see its face, but there was nothing there, just smooth, blank space where features should have been. Her hands were shaking now. This wasn't right. None of this was right. She needed to get out of this fog, needed to get back to normal road conditions. She increased her speed, going faster than was safe in these conditions, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she needed to move, needed to keep moving. More figures appeared. They lined both sides of the road now, standing at regular intervals like fence posts, all perfectly still, all facing toward her truck. Jennifer counted 20, 30, 50 of them, more emerging from the fog with each passing second. They were all the same, too tall, too thin, featureless, silent. And then they began to move. It started slowly, almost imperceptibly. The figures turned in unison, tracking her truck as it passed. Then they began to walk, stepping onto the road, moving toward the center. They weren't trying to block her path exactly, but they were narrowing it, creating a corridor that forced her to drive between them. Jennifer's breath came in short, panicked gasps. She wanted to stop, wanted to turn around, but the road was too narrow and the figures were too close. She had no choice but to continue forward, driving between the rows of impossible people that the fog had birthed. They reached toward her as she passed. Long arms extended from bodies that seemed to have no solid form, fingers, or what might have been fingers, stretching toward her windows and trailer. Jennifer heard scratching sounds against the metal, heard something that might have been voices but wasn't quite, sounds that were almost words but not quite human enough to understand. The fog grew thicker. Jennifer could barely see 10 feet ahead now, and the figures were everywhere, pressing close to her truck, their blank faces, if they could be called faces, level with her windows. She could see them in detail now, and what she saw made her stomach churn. They weren't solid. They were made of fog itself, condensed and shaped into forms that mimicked human beings but got the details wrong. She could see the fog swirling inside them, could see through them in places where the concentration wasn't thick enough. They were constructs, puppets made of vapor, and something else was controlling them. One of the figures pressed its face against Jennifer's driver's side window. She screamed and jerked the wheel, nearly losing control. The figure's face, that horrible blank space, distorted as it pressed against the glass, and Jennifer could see its mouth opening, forming words she couldn't hear. The fog inside it swirled faster, almost frantically, and its hands clawed at the window with silent desperation. Jennifer floored the accelerator. The truck surged forward and she plowed through the crowd of fog people. They didn't scatter or move aside. They simply dissipated as the truck hit them, turning back into formless fog before reforming behind her. In her mirrors, she could see them reassembling, continuing their march along the road. The CB radio suddenly crackled to life. But it wasn't another driver's voice she heard. It was something else, something that sounded like wind and water and the rustling of leaves, all combined into patterns that almost formed words. Stay with us. Stay in the fog, you're one of us now. You've always been one of us. You belong here in the fog forever. Jennifer ripped the CB microphone from its mount and threw it aside. The voice continued from the speaker, growing louder, more insistent. She reached down and yanked the power cord from the radio, silencing it. But the fog people were keeping pace with her now. Despite her speed, despite the powerful engine, they stayed alongside her truck, jogging with that same mechanical precision, their two long legs carrying them faster than any human could run. More emerged from the fog ahead, creating an endless corridor of impossible figures. Jennifer realized with growing horror that she couldn't outrun them. She'd been driving for what felt like hours, but her odometer showed she'd covered only 3 miles since entering the fog. Time itself seemed distorted here, stretched and warped like everything else. Then she saw it ahead, a gap in the fog, a patch of clear air where normal daylight penetrated. It looked impossibly bright after so long in the gray murk, and Jennifer drove toward it like a drowning person swimming toward the surface. The fog people saw it too. They surged forward, trying to cut her off, trying to block her path to the clear air. Their mouths opened wide, too wide, impossibly wide, and that sound like almost words became almost screams, filled with rage and hunger and desperate longing. Jennifer's truck hit the edge of the clear air, and everything changed. The fog released her suddenly, completely, as if she'd been gripped by something and then dropped. She burst into normal daylight, into normal mountain air, into a normal November morning with normal fog drifting in normal patterns through the valleys below. Driving for another mile before she dared to slow down, before she dared to look in her mirrors. Behind her, the fog bank sat on the road like a wall, yellow-gray and churning, and at its edge, barely visible, she could see figures standing, watching her escape. Jennifer pulled into the first rest area she found and sat there for an hour, shaking, trying to process what had happened. Other trucks passed by, other travelers stopped and left, and everything seemed normal. She tried to convince herself that she'd imagined it, that she'd been tired and the fog had played tricks on her perception. But she knew the truth. She'd driven through something that shouldn't exist, some pocket of wrongness where the fog had become something more than water vapor, where it had taken shape and form and terrible purpose. She eventually continued to Asheville and delivered her supplies, 2 hours late. Her supervisor wasn't happy about the delay, and Jennifer couldn't explain what had happened. How could she tell anyone that she'd been trapped in fog that formed people, that reached for her with hands made of vapor, that had tried to keep her forever? She researched the area later, looking for any similar reports. She found stories, scattered and dismissed as folklore, about fog that behaved strangely in certain parts of the Smokies. Stories about drivers who disappeared on clear roads and were found later, miles away, with no memory of how they got there. Stories about people who vanished into fog and were never seen again. One story particularly disturbed her. In 1953, a tour bus carrying 24 people had disappeared on Route 441. It was found 3 days later, abandoned on a side road. The passengers and driver were gone. The bus's fuel tank was full, the engine was running, and luggage was still in the overhead racks, but every person aboard had vanished. Searchers found something strange. Inside the bus, every surface was covered with a thin film of moisture like condensation. And in that moisture, investigators found patterns, swirls and whorls that almost looked like handprints, hundreds of them, all over the windows and seats and ceiling. As if the bus had been filled with fog that had formed hands, that had reached and grasped and taken. The passengers were never found. The incident was eventually classified as an unsolved disappearance, and the bus was quietly scrapped. Jennifer still drives delivery routes through the Smokies, but she's changed her schedule. She refuses to drive in the early morning hours, refuses to be on the mountain roads when fog is likely. When other drivers ask her why, she tells them she's just being cautious, just respecting the weather. She doesn't tell them about the fog people. She doesn't tell them about the things that live in the mountain mists, the shapes that form and watch and wait for travelers to trap. She doesn't tell them that the fog in these mountains isn't always natural, that sometimes it's hungry, that sometimes it wants to keep what it catches. Because Jennifer knows she was lucky. She found the edge of the fog, found her way back to normal reality. But she thinks about those other people, those who didn't escape. She thinks about the tour bus passengers from 1953, and she wonders if they're still in the fog somewhere, still driving through that yellow-gray murk, still trying to find their way out. She wonders if the figures she saw were people who'd been caught before, people who'd been absorbed into the fog and transformed into puppets, into bait to lure others in. She wonders if, had she not escaped, she would have become one of them, standing by the roadside, reaching toward passing vehicles, trying to trap new victims in the endless gray. The Smokies are beautiful mountains, but they hide secrets in their fog. And Jennifer Price knows now that some fogs aren't meant to be driven through, that some mists hide things that hunger for the living, that wait patiently for victims to enter their domain. She escaped once. She won't risk it again. And when she sees yellow-tinged fog rolling across the road ahead, she turns around and finds another route, no matter how much time it costs her. Because some delays are worth it. Some detours save your life. And some fogs, once you enter them, you never leave. Story 6. The Repeat Loop. Kevin Martins had been driving tanker trucks for 9 years, hauling various liquids, fuel, chemicals, water, across the eastern United States. He took pride in his safety record, in his ability to handle heavy loads on difficult roads, in his reputation for reliability. When his dispatcher offered him a rush job hauling diesel fuel through the mountains of North Carolina, Kevin accepted without hesitation. Premium pay for a night run, straightforward route, easy money. He picked up the load at a fuel depot outside Charlotte at 8 p.m. on a Tuesday and headed east on Highway 74, bound for a distribution center in Murphy. The route would take him through the Nantahala National Forest, over mountain passes and through valleys where cell service was spotty at best. But Kevin had driven worse roads, and the weather forecast was clear. The first hour was routine. Traffic was light, and Kevin made good time as 74 climbed into the mountains. He passed through small towns and long stretches of empty forest, his headlights illuminating the narrow road ahead. His CB radio provided occasional company, other truckers reporting on road conditions, warning about speed traps, the usual nighttime chatter. Around 9:30, Kevin entered a particularly remote section of highway. The road here was narrow and winding, cut into the side of a mountain with steep drops on one side and sheer rock faces on the other. No guardrails, no shoulder, just pavement and then nothing. Kevin had driven this section before and knew to take it slow and careful. He rounded a curve and saw something in the road ahead, a deer, frozen in his headlights. Kevin hit the brakes and the air horn simultaneously. The tanker slowed, the deer bounded away, and Kevin breathed a sigh of relief. Close call, but nothing he hadn't handled dozens of times before. He continued around the curve, picking up speed again. His headlights illuminated the road ahead, the white line marking the edge, the dark wall of trees on the left and the drop-off on the right. He checked his mirrors, checked his gauges, everything normal. Then he rounded the curve again. The same curve, the same section of road, and there, frozen in his headlights, was the same deer. Kevin's foot hit the brake automatically, confusion flooding his mind. He'd just passed this spot. He'd just seen this deer. But here it was again, standing in the exact same position, its eyes reflecting in his headlights with that same greenish glow. He hit the air horn again. The deer bounded away, vanishing into the trees on the same side in the same direction. Kevin sat there for a moment, his truck idling, trying to understand what had just happened. Had he gotten turned around somehow? Had he accidentally doubled back? No, that was impossible. The road was one continuous path with no turnoffs for the past 10 miles. He couldn't have turned around without realizing it. Maybe it was a different deer. Yes, that had to be it. Just another deer in the same spot. Coincidence, nothing more. Kevin continued driving, but unease had settled in his stomach like a cold stone. He watched the road carefully, noting landmarks, a distinctive boulder on the left, a dead tree on the right, a patch where the pavement showed old repair work. He'd pay attention this time, make sure he wasn't somehow getting confused. He drove for what he estimated was 5 minutes. Then he rounded the curve again. The same curve. The same boulder, the same dead tree, the same patched pavement. And the same deer, frozen in his headlights in the exact same position. Kevin's hands steering wheel. This wasn't possible. This couldn't be happening. He looked at his odometer. It showed he'd traveled 8 miles since the first deer encounter. But he was back at the same spot. He didn't hit the air horn this time. He just sat there, staring at the deer. The deer stared back, unmoving, its eyes reflecting the headlights. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the deer turned its head slowly, deliberately, and looked directly at Kevin. Not just in his general direction, but at him specifically, making eye contact through the windshield. Its mouth opened, and Kevin could have sworn it spoke, though he heard nothing. Then it bounded away exactly as before. Kevin grabbed his CB radio. "This is Mountain Fuel Transport on Highway 74 eastbound. Is anyone else on this route? I need someone to confirm my position. Over." Static. Pure static. No response, no background chatter, nothing. He tried his cell phone, no signal. Kevin's breath came faster. He was trapped in something, some kind of loop or repetition. The same section of road, the same sequence of events over and over. He had to find a way out, had to break the pattern somehow. He decided not to stop for the deer next time. He'd drive straight through, see what happened if he deviated from the script. He pressed the accelerator and drove forward. 5 minutes later, he rounded the curve again. The deer was there, standing in the road. Kevin gritted his teeth and aimed the truck directly at it, not slowing, not honking. The deer didn't move. Kevin's truck passed through it as if it weren't there. No impact, no sound, nothing. In his mirror, he saw the deer still standing on the road behind him, unharmed, still frozen in that same position. Kevin's blood ran cold. The deer wasn't real. None of this was real, at least not in any normal sense. He was trapped in something, some kind of pocket outside normal reality, and he had no idea how to escape. He tried other variations. He stopped the truck completely and waited for 10 minutes. When he started driving again, he immediately rounded the curve and encountered the deer. He tried backing up. The road behind him twisted and turned until he found himself approaching the curve from the front again. He tried shutting off his engine and lights. When he restarted them, he was at the beginning of the loop. Time seemed meaningless here. Kevin's watch showed 9:35 p.m., the same time it had been when the loop started. He'd been driving for what felt like hours, but time wasn't passing. Or it was passing only for him, while the loop remained frozen in the same moment. The worst part was the absolute isolation. No other vehicle, no signs of human life, just Kevin and his truck and this endless repetition of the same curve, the same deer, the same 5-minute drive that led nowhere. He tried to remember what had been different about this section of road. Had there been any landmarks, any signs? He thought back to his earlier trip through this area, trying to recall details. And then he remembered. There had been a historical marker near here, something about a Civil War skirmish or an old settlement. On his next loop through, Kevin watched for the marker, and there it was, barely visible in his headlights, a small blue sign set back from the road. He couldn't read the text from his truck, so on the next pass he stopped and climbed down from his cab. The air outside was cold and dead silent. No wind, no insect sounds, no rustling leaves. Just absolute silence, as if he'd gone deaf. Kevin walked to the historical marker and shone his flashlight on it. Site of Darkness Falls Settlement, the marker read. Founded 1847, abandoned 1849. Entire population of 47 people vanished without trace. Local legend claims they were taken by the mountain. No bodies were ever recovered. Below the text was a small map showing where the settlement had been. It was up the mountain from the road, maybe a quarter-mile into the forest. Kevin looked at the dark trees. Something up there had taken an entire settlement. Something had made 47 people disappear. And now that something had trapped him in this loop, this repeated moment of time. But why? What did it want? The deer. Kevin suddenly understood the deer was an offering. Every time through the loop, he was given the choice to stop or continue to show mercy or violence. And every time he'd made the same choice. He de-stopped, hit the horn, let the deer escape. He'd been consistent, but maybe that was the problem. Maybe the loop was testing him, waiting for him to make a different choice. Or maybe it was feeding on his repetitions, on his fear and confusion, growing stronger with each cycle. Kevin walked back to his truck, an idea forming. He'd been thinking of this as a trap, as something imprisoning him. But what if it was a door? What if the only way out was to go deeper in to find the source? On the next loop, instead of following the road, Kevin turned his wheel hard and drove off the pavement. His truck crashed through underbrush and between trees, branches scraping the tanker, the vehicle lurching over rough ground. He drove uphill, toward where the historical marker had indicated the settlement was located. The forest grew denser, but Kevin kept driving, using his truck like a battering ram, forcing spaces that were almost too narrow. His headlights illuminated a nightmare landscape, trees that grew at impossible angles, vines that seemed to writhe and pull away from his truck, shadows that moved wrong. And then he burst into a clearing, and the settlement was there. Darkness Falls. 47 buildings arranged in concentric circles around a central structure that might have been a church or meeting hall. Every building was intact, preserved perfectly despite being abandoned for over 170 years. Lights burned in some windows, actual oil lamps or candles, casting warm yellow glows, and there were people. They stood in the doorways and windows of the buildings, watching Kevin's truck. Men, women, and children dressed in mid-19th century clothing. Their faces were pale and expressionless, and they stood absolutely still, like mannequins. Kevin brought his truck to a stop in the center of the settlement, facing the central building. Its door stood open, and a figure waited there, a tall man in a black suit and hat, his face hidden in shadow. The figure beckoned. Kevin knew he should run, should reverse the truck and smash his way back to the road. But he also knew that wouldn't work. The loop would just reset and he'd be back at the curve with the deer. The only way out was forward, through whatever waited in that central building. He climbed down from his cab. The moment his feet touched the ground, the people in the doorways began to move. They stepped out of the buildings and walked toward him, converging in a slow, deliberate procession. Kevin ran for the central building. The interior was a single large room, empty except for a circle drawn on the floor in what looked like ash or charcoal. The tall figure stood on the far side of the circle. As Kevin entered, the figure removed its hat and Kevin saw its face, or rather the absence of face. Where features should have been, there was only smooth, blank flesh like an unfinished sculpture. "You have been driving for 47 hours, the figure said, its voice coming from nowhere and everywhere. "You have completed 47 loops, one for each of us who was taken, one for each of us who waits." Kevin realized the truth then. The settlement hadn't been abandoned. Its people had been taken, absorbed into the mountain, into whatever presence dwelled here. And now they were trapped, unable to leave, unable to die, frozen in time like the loop he'd been trapped in. "You have two choices," the figure continued. "Join us, become the 48th, and we may be released, or leave and condemn us to wait for the next traveler. But if you leave, you will carry us with you. You will never forget. You will never be free of us." Behind Kevin, the residents had filled the doorway, blocking his exit. 47 pale faces stared at him without expression, waiting for his choice. Kevin looked at the circle on the floor. He understood what it represented: a trap, a prison, a space outside of time where the mountain's hunger could be contained. The residents of Darkness Falls had drawn it in a desperate attempt to stop whatever had been taking them. But instead of catching it, they'd caught themselves, locked themselves into an eternal moment. "There's a third choice," Kevin said. "I break the circle." He stepped forward and dragged his boot across the ash line, smearing it, breaking the pattern. Figure screamed, a sound that was wind and earth and centuries of trapped time releasing at once. The building began to shake and cracks appeared in the floor, spreading out from the broken circle. Kevin ran. He shoved through the crowd of residents who had become insubstantial, translucent, fading. He climbed into his truck, started the engine, and drove. Behind him, the entire settlement was collapsing into the ground, buildings sinking, trees falling inward, as if the mountain were swallowing it all back up. He crashed through the forest and his truck burst back onto the highway. Normal highway, normal night. Kevin looked at his watch, 9:36 p.m. 1 minute had passed since the loop began. But in his mirrors, where the forest should have been, Kevin saw 47 figures standing at the tree line. They were translucent, barely visible, but they were there, watching, following. Kevin drives still, moving from route to route, never staying in one place. The figures follow at a distance, always in his mirrors, always watching. He broke their prison, but he didn't free them. He just made them mobile, bound them to himself instead of to the mountain. He wonders sometimes if he made the right choice, but at least he's free. At least he's not trapped in an endless loop, repeating the same moments forever. The price is that he'll never be alone again, never be free of his 47 silent passengers. They wait in his mirrors, patient as only the dead can be, and Kevin drives on through the Appalachian night. Story 7. The Replacement. Daniel Crawford had been a regional driver for 12 years, running consistent routes through Tennessee and Virginia, home every weekend, a stable life that most long-haul truckers envied. He knew his routes intimately, knew where every truck stop was located, where the good diners were hidden, where the road conditions got dicey in bad weather. His wife Sarah often joked that he could drive his route blindfolded. On a Monday morning in late September, Daniel left his home in Bristol, Tennessee, heading for his usual weekly run, a circuit through Johnson City, Kingsport, and back through the small mountain towns that dotted the Virginia border. He'd driven this exact route at least 600 times over the years. Every turn, every mile marker, every landmark was burned into his memory. The morning was clear and cool, perfect driving weather. Daniel stopped at his usual gas station for coffee, exchanged his usual greetings with the clerk who'd worked there for 5 years, and got back on the road. Everything was normal, routine, comfortable. He was about an hour into his drive, heading north on Route 421, when he noticed something odd. There was a new building on the left side of the highway, a large warehouse or distribution center painted bright blue with a parking lot full of cars. Daniel frowned. He'd driven this road hundreds of times and there'd never been anything there before, just forest and a gravel turnoff that didn't lead anywhere. When had they built it? Construction on a building that size should have taken months, and he'd driven this route just last week. He would have noticed construction equipment, partially completed walls, something. But there it stood, looking like it had been there for years. The paint was weathered, the parking lot's lines were faded, and the sign out front, Appalachian Distribution Services, showed where from sun and rain. Daniel shook his head. Maybe he just never noticed it before, had been too focused on the road or lost in thought. It seemed impossible, but what other explanation was there? 5 miles later, he noticed another change. A section of road that had been 2 lanes was now 3 lanes, and the town of Shady Valley, which he always passed through, seemed different. There was a new gas station on the corner where an old auto repair shop had stood. The town's sign claimed a population of 847, but Daniel distinctly remembered it being 612. A cold feeling began to grow in Daniel's stomach. Something was wrong. These weren't small changes he might have overlooked. These were major differences, impossible differences. He pulled over at the new gas station and went inside. The clerk behind the counter was a young man Daniel had never seen before. "Excuse me," Daniel said, "how long has this station been here?" The clerk looked at him oddly. "About 15 years, I think. I've worked here for 3. Why? And that auto repair shop that used to be on this corner, when did they tear that down?" "Auto repair shop?" The clerk shook his head. "There's never been an auto repair shop here. This station was built on an empty lot." Daniel left without anything. Back in his truck, he pulled out his phone and called Sarah. She answered on the second ring. "Hey honey," she said, "forget something. Sarah, I need you to do me a favor. Look up Appalachian Distribution Services. It's supposedly on Route 421, about 20 miles north of Bristol." He heard her typing. "Okay, here it is. Large distribution center and warehouse. Been there since 2004. They handle shipping for several major retailers. Why? That building wasn't there last week." Silence on the line. Then, "Daniel, are you feeling okay? You sound stressed." "I'm fine, I could have sworn that section was just forest." "Maybe you're thinking of a different part of the route." Sarah's voice carried concern now. "Honey, maybe you should come home, take a day off." "No, I'm fine, just tired, I guess. I'll call you tonight." Daniel ended the call and sat there, staring at the unfamiliar gas station. He wasn't confused about his route. He knew this road better than he knew his own driveway, and these changes were real, substantial, impossible to have overlooked. Unless he was wrong, unless his memory was faulty. But how could he be wrong about so many things? He continued his route, and with each mile, more wrongness revealed itself. A bridge he remembered being wooden was now concrete. A church in Trade, Tennessee, had a different steeple, brick instead of white wood. A section of road he remembered being straight had a new curve in it, and the people were wrong too. At a truck stop where he always ate lunch, the waitress who'd served him for 7 years was gone, replaced by a woman who claimed to have worked there for 10 years. The other regular customers were different. Some faces he recognized were missing, while strangers sat in their usual spots. Daniel ordered coffee and pulled out his phone. He started searching for information about his route, about the towns he passed through. Everything he found online contradicted his memories. Buildings he remembered being built just 2 years ago had existed for decades. Roads he remembered being expanded in 2015 had been that width since the 1990s. The worst part was that everything was documented. Photographs, news articles, construction records, all supporting this version of reality, all contradicting what he clearly remembered. Daniel tried calling other drivers he knew who worked similar routes, but when he described his concerns, they looked at him like he was crazy. Yes, they said, Appalachian Distribution Services had been there forever. Yes, the bridge on Route 421 had always been concrete. Was he feeling all right? Maybe he needed to see a doctor. His route, Daniel was questioning his own sanity. Had he suffered some kind of stroke? A brain injury he hadn't noticed? How else could his memories be so completely wrong? He finished his deliveries and drove home, dreading what he might find. Would his house be different too? Would Sarah have changed? Would his entire life be altered? But his house was exactly as he remembered it. Sarah greeted him at the door, same as always. Their daughter Emma was doing homework at the kitchen table just like normal. Everything in his home was right, was consistent with his memories. "How was your route?" Sarah asked as she hugged him. "Fine," Daniel lied, "just fine." Over dinner, Daniel asked casual questions, probing to see if Sarah's memories matched his own. They did. She remembered the same vacations, the same events, the same history. Their home videos and photo albums showed the life he remembered. Nothing was wrong here. It was only his route that had changed, only the world outside his home. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He lay in bed trying to understand what had happened. And then a terrible thought occurred to him. What if he was the one who had changed? What if somehow he'd been replaced by a version of himself from a parallel reality, a world where things were slightly different? But no, that was crazy, wasn't it? The next Monday, Daniel drove his route again, paying careful attention to every detail. The changes from the previous week remained. The blue warehouse, the concrete bridge, the altered towns. But now there were new changes too. A billboard he clearly remembered from last week was gone, replaced by a different advertisement. A diner in Damascus had a different name. A section of forest had been cleared for a housing development that looked years old but definitely hadn't been there before. The world was changing around him, rewriting itself, and only he seemed to notice. Daniel started keeping detailed notes. He photographed landmarks, recorded mileages, documented everything about his route. Then the following week, he compared his notes to reality. The changes were accelerating. Each week brought more differences, more revisions to the world. And it wasn't just buildings and roads anymore. People were changing too. The clerk at his usual coffee stop was different. Same person, but with different mannerisms, a different accent, different memories of their previous interactions. A friend he'd known for 5 years didn't recognize him. His own brother mentioned events from their childhood that Daniel had no memory of. The world was being replaced piece by piece, rewritten like a document being edited. And somehow, Daniel retained memories of the original, even as everything around him changed. He researched online, looking for others who'd experienced similar phenomena. He found scattered reports, people who claimed reality had changed, that their memories didn't match documented history. Most were dismissed as confused or mentally ill. But Daniel wasn't confused. He was absolutely certain of what he was experiencing. He found one account that chilled him, a woman in Kentucky who'd experienced similar changes for 6 months before they stopped. "The world finished replacing itself," she wrote. "And then I started to change too. I can feel it happening. My memories are being overwritten, replaced with new ones that fit this version of reality. Soon, I won't remember the original world at all. I'm writing this while I still can before I become someone else entirely." That had been her last post. When Daniel tried to contact her, the email bounced. He searched for her name and found that she died 3 years ago in a car accident, 3 years before she'd made that post, according to the date on her social media profile. She'd been erased, replaced by a version of herself who had died years earlier. Daniel became obsessed with documenting everything, creating records that might survive the changes. He filled notebooks with descriptions of how he remembered things. He recorded videos of himself describing landmarks, people, events. He created backup files and stored them in multiple locations. But each week when he checked his records, they changed too. His notebooks contained descriptions that didn't match his memories. His videos showed him describing things differently than he recalled. Even his documentation was being rewritten. Sarah noticed his obsession. "You're scaring me," she said. "You need help, Daniel, professional help." "What if I'm right?" Daniel asked. "What if the world really is changing?" "Then there's nothing you can do about it," Sarah said gently. "And driving yourself crazy won't help." She was right, but Daniel couldn't stop. He couldn't accept that reality itself was fluid, that history was being rewritten, that he was slowly being erased and replaced by a different version of himself who would fit this altered world. The changes reached his home last month. Small things at first, a picture on the wall he didn't remember hanging, a piece of furniture in a different position. Then larger things. Sarah mentioned a vacation they'd taken that Daniel had no memory of. Emma asked about her Uncle Mark and Daniel had no idea who she meant. "Your brother," Sarah said, confused. "Mark, your younger brother." Daniel was an only child. He'd never had a brother, but when he checked family, there was a boy he didn't recognize in pictures from his childhood. When he called his parents, they talked about both their sons, spoke of memories that included this phantom brother. The world had given him a sibling who'd never existed, or who had existed in this version of reality but not in his original one. Daniel knows his time is running out. The changes are accelerating, reaching deeper into his life, altering more fundamental aspects of his existence. Soon they'll reach his core, rewrite his essential self, and he'll become whoever this version of reality says he should be. He won't remember writing this. He won't remember his original life, his true memories. He'll be replaced by someone who fits seamlessly into this altered world, someone who doesn't notice the changes because for him, things have always been this way. Daniel Crawford will cease to exist, even though a man with his name and face will continue to drive trucks through Tennessee and Virginia, continue to come home to a wife and daughter, continue to live a life. But it won't be him. It will be the replacement, the new Daniel, the one the world is creating to match its revised history. And somewhere in the Appalachian Mountains, on roads that are constantly being rewritten, the real Daniel will be forgotten completely, erased as thoroughly as if he'd never existed at all. The world doesn't just change in Appalachia. Sometimes it replaces things entirely, overwrites reality itself, and there's nothing anyone can do to stop it. Daniel's last hope is that someone will read this and believe, will recognize that their own memories don't match the world around them, will understand that they too might be scheduled for replacement. Maybe together, people who remember the original world can resist somehow, can hold onto their true selves, but Daniel knows that's probably just wishful thinking. The changes are too pervasive, too complete. Reality itself is being edited, and he's just a detail that doesn't fit anymore, a mistake that needs to be corrected. Soon there will be no more Daniel Crawford, not the real one, just the replacement, living in a world that was always this way, never knowing that he's different, that he replaced someone else. The mountains of Appalachia don't just hold secrets. Sometimes they rewrite them, alter them, make them fit a new narrative. And anyone who remembers the original story becomes a loose end that needs to be tied up. Daniel was a loose end, and now he's being erased. Story 8. The Service Station. Robert Hayes had driven armored vehicles for Loomis Security for 19 years, transporting cash and valuables across 6 states. It was high-stress work that required constant vigilance, detailed route planning, and nerves that could handle knowing you were carrying millions of dollars in a vehicle that criminals might try to rob. Robert had never been hit, never had a serious incident, and he took pride in his perfect safety record. On a Thursday afternoon in October, Robert was driving a route through southwestern Virginia, transporting bank deposits from small-town branches to a regional processing center in Abingdon. His usual partner had called in sick, so Robert was driving solo, not ideal, but not prohibited by company policy for this particular route. The route was considered low risk, rural areas, minimal traffic, no history of robbery attempts. Robert had left Bluefield around noon with deposits from 3 banks, about $280,000 in cash plus various documents and securities. The route to Abingdon followed back roads through the mountains, a winding path through valleys and hollows that added miles, but avoided the interstate highway system where armored vehicles were more likely to attract attention. He was about an hour into the drive, deep in the mountains with no cell signal and no radio reception, when his vehicle started making a concerning noise, a metallic grinding from the engine that grew steadily worse. Robert pulled over immediately, knowing that an armored vehicle breakdown in a remote location was the kind of scenario every driver dreaded. He popped the hood and examined the engine. The problem was obvious even to his non-mechanic eyes. A belt had shredded, and pieces of rubber were wound through various components. The vehicle wasn't going anywhere without a tow truck and significant repairs. Robert got back in the cab and tried his radio. No response. He was too deep in the mountains for the signal to reach any relay stations. His cell phone showed no service. He was completely isolated, sitting in a disabled armored vehicle containing $280,000 in cash, on a road where he might not see another vehicle for hours. He checked his GPS for the nearest town. The device showed a small community called Milstead about 3 miles back the way he'd come. Robert didn't remember passing through any town, but he'd been focused on the road and might have missed it. There might be a gas station there with a phone, maybe even a mechanic. Protocol said Robert should stay with the vehicle until help arrived. Never leave the cargo unattended. Miles from nowhere with no way to call for help. He could sit here all night, or he could walk to Milstead and find a phone. After 30 minutes of waiting to see if another vehicle would pass, Robert made his decision. He locked the armored vehicle. It was designed to withstand serious attack, so it would be safe for the hour or two he'd need to walk to town and back. He took the keys, his weapon, and his radio and started hiking. The walk back along the narrow mountain road felt longer than 3 miles. Robert kept checking his GPS, watching the distance to Milstead slowly decrease. The afternoon sun filtered through the trees, casting long shadows across the pavement. Birds sang in the forest, and the air smelled of pine and autumn leaves. It would have been pleasant if Robert hadn't been deeply worried about leaving his vehicle and cargo unattended. After 45 minutes of walking, Robert rounded a curve and saw Milstead. It was a small community, maybe a dozen buildings clustered where the main road intersected with a dirt track leading off into the hills. Robert could see a general store, a post office, several houses, and thank God, a service station with 2 old-fashioned pumps out front. But as he walked into the town, Robert felt a growing sense of wrongness. Everything looked old, decades out of date. The cars parked along the street were vintage models from the 1970s. The general store had hand-painted advertisements for products Robert hadn't seen since childhood. Even the clothes on the people he could see through windows and sitting on porches seemed wrong, dated styles from 40 or 50 years ago. Robert approached the service station. A man in grease-stained coveralls was working on an old pickup truck in the garage bay. He looked up as Robert approached, and his expression shifted from neutral to intensely focused. "Help you?" the man asked. His accent was local Appalachian, thick and musical. "My vehicle broke down about 3 miles up the road," Robert said. "I need to use a phone to call for a tow truck." The man wiped his hands on a rag and studied Robert for a long moment. "Phone's inside, owner S in there. Name S. Pike. Tell him Harlan sent you in." Robert nodded his thanks and entered the station's office. It was small and cluttered with a desk, a filing cabinet, and a rotary phone, an actual rotary phone sitting on the counter. A heavy-set man with a gray beard sat behind the desk, reading a newspaper. He looked up as Robert entered. "Need something?" Pike asked. "I need to use your phone. My vehicle broke down up the road." Pike, the phone. "Help yourself. Local calls are free. Long-distance costs." Robert picked up the receiver and dialed his company's emergency line. The phone rang once, then he heard only static. He tried again, same result. He tried a third time, and this time he heard something in the static that made his blood run cold. Voices. Not the voice of his dispatcher, but multiple voices talking over each other, words he couldn't quite make out. "Phone lines have been spotty all week," Pike said, not looking up from his newspaper. "Storm knocked something down, should be fixed soon." Robert set the receiver down. "Is there another phone I could try? This is an emergency." "Only phone in town," Pike replied. "You're welcome to wait and try again later. Or Harlan in the garage could probably fix whatever's wrong with your vehicle. He's good with engines." Something about this entire situation was making Robert's instincts scream. The outdated town, the non-functional phone, the mechanic who was conveniently available, it felt staged like a trap. "What year is it?" Robert asked suddenly. Pike looked up from his newspaper, his expression unreadable. 2024. Why?" And you always dress like it's 1975. We're traditional folk here, Pike said. His eyes had gone flat and cold. Don't see the need to change just because the outside world does. Now you going to get your vehicle fixed, or you going to keep asking strange questions? Robert backed toward the door. I'll try the phone again later. He walked out of the office, moving quickly. Harlan was no longer working on the pickup truck. The garage bay was empty and Robert couldn't see anyone around. The street was empty too. The people he'd seen on the porches were gone. Robert started walking back toward the main road, toward his vehicle. He needed to get out of this town, needed to get back to something familiar and real. He'd walk all the way to Abingdon if necessary, but he wasn't staying in Milstead another minute. Hey, a voice called behind him. Where you going? Robert turned to see Harlan following him, walking with purpose. Behind Harlan, other people were emerging from buildings, men mostly, all dressed in those outdated clothes, all watching Robert with the same flat, predatory expression. Robert ran. He sprinted back along the main road, hearing footsteps pounding behind him. They were chasing him, and they weren't trying to hide it anymore. Whatever facade Milstead had maintained was dropped. This was a trap, and he'd walked right into it. Robert ran faster than he'd run in years, his lungs burning, his weapon bouncing against his hip. He didn't dare look back, just focused on the road, getting away from this place. The footsteps behind him gradually faded, and when Robert finally risked a glance over his shoulder, he saw no one. The road was empty, but when he looked ahead, his heart sank. He was back in Milstead. The same cluster of buildings, the same service station, the same main street. He'd run in a straight line for at least 10 minutes, but somehow he'd ended up right back where he started. Pike stood in the middle of the street, arms crossed, smiling. Can't leave Milstead that way, he said. Road just circles back. Only way out is the way you came in, but you can't go back that way either, can you? Your vehicle's up there, and you need help with it. Robert pulled his weapon, a Glock 9 that he'd carried for years but never fired except on the range. He aimed it at Pike. Stay back, I'm leaving, Pike laughed. Go ahead, walk past me, follow the road, see where it takes you. Robert kept his weapon trained on Pike and walked. He followed the main road past the service station, past the houses, toward where it curved back into the forest. Behind him, he heard laughter. 30 minutes later, after following a road that should have led away from town, Robert found himself entering Milstead from the opposite direction. The buildings were the same. Pike still stood in the street, still smiling. Told you, Pike said. Roads in these mountains don't always go where you think they should. They lead where they want to lead, and right now they all lead here. Robert's mind reeled. This was impossible. Roads didn't work this way. Geography didn't work this way. But he'd experienced it himself, every path leading back to Milstead, looping impossibly, defying the laws of space and distance. What do you want? Robert asked, his weapon still drawn but his hand shaking. Same thing this town has always wanted, Pike said. Visitors, people to stay a while, company. We don't get many people through Milstead anymore. Used to back when the mine was running and the timber trucks came through, but that was a long time ago. Now it's just us, and anyone who happens to find their way here. I'm leaving, Robert said. I'll find a way out. You will, Pike agreed. Eventually, after you've stayed a while. After you've become part of Milstead, then the roads will let you leave. But by that point, you won't want them anymore. Robert spent 3 days in Milstead. 3 days trying to find a way out. 3 days following roads that looped back on themselves. 3 days of being watched by the town's residents who never seemed to sleep, who stood in doorways and windows observing him with those flat, empty eyes. He searched for weaknesses in whatever trap held him, tried going cross-country through the forest only to emerge back on Milstead's main street, following power lines only to have them lead in a circle. He tried navigating by the sun, but the sun's position seemed inconsistent, moving in ways that didn't match proper geography. The residents of Milstead left him mostly alone, but they watched constantly. And slowly, Robert began to change. He felt it happening, his urgency to escape fading, his fear diminishing, a strange acceptance settling over him. The town was comfortable in its way. The residents weren't hostile, just persistent. And didn't he need rest? Hadn't he been working too hard for too many years? On the third night, Robert found himself sitting on the porch of one of the empty houses, watching the sun set behind the mountains. It was peaceful, quiet. Why was he fighting so hard to leave? That thought shocked him back to awareness. No, he had to resist. Milstead was doing something to him, changing him, making him accept captivity as normal. He had to maintain his will to escape, had to keep trying. On the fourth day, Robert found it. Not an escape route, but an explanation. In the service station's office, while Pike was occupied elsewhere, Robert rifled through the filing cabinet. He found old newspapers dating back to 1976. The headlines told the story. Local mine disaster claims 47 lives. Milstead residents vote to abandon town. Final families leave Milstead this week. The town had died in 1976 after a mine disaster. Everyone had left. Milstead should have been a ghost town, abandoned and forgotten. But somehow it had continued. The town had refused to die, had created some kind of pocket outside normal reality where it could persist. And it sustained itself by trapping travelers, by slowly assimilating them into its population, adding them to the collection of residents who stood in doorways and watched with dead eyes. Robert looked out the office window. Pike was standing in the street, watching the office, knowing Robert was inside, waiting patiently. They could wait forever. Time worked differently here. The residents of Milstead had all the time in the world, but Robert didn't. His company would be looking for him, would track his GPS, would find his abandoned vehicle. Eventually, they'd send someone to investigate, and that person would face the same trap, unless Robert could warn them somehow. He found paper and a pen in the desk and wrote quickly, "Milstead is a trap. Do not enter. Roads loop. Cannot escape. Town died 1976 but persists. If you're reading this, turn back. Get help. Send military if necessary. Do not try to rescue alone." He wrote and put it in his pocket. Then he walked outside. Pike smiled at him. "Ready to stop fighting?" Pike asked. "No," Robert said, "but I'm done running." He walked to the edge of town, to the point where the road curved into forest. He tried this path dozens of times, always looping back. But this time, before he started walking, Robert pulled out his weapon and his note. He wedged the note under a rock at the edge of the road, weighing it down so it wouldn't blow away. Then he fired 3 shots into the air, signal shots, spaced 5 seconds apart, the universal distress call. If any hikers or hunters were in these mountains, they might hear. Then Robert walked down the road. He'd walk it 1,000 more times if necessary. He'd keep trying, keep resisting, keep fighting against Milstead's pull. Because the moment he stopped, the moment he accepted this place, he'd become one of them. Another empty-eyed resident watching from doorways, helping to trap the next visitor. Robert Hayes is still walking. His note was found by searchers 6 months later, along with shell casings from his weapon. But they found no town, no service station, no buildings, just forest and a road that led through empty mountains. The armored vehicle was recovered exactly where Robert had left it, with its cargo intact. His company declared him missing, presumed dead. Searchers found no sign of him, but drivers on that road sometimes report strange things. They see a man walking along the shoulder, dressed in a Lumi security uniform, looking tired but determined. When they stop to offer help, he waves them past, shouting warnings they can't quite hear. And sometimes, on certain days when the light is wrong and the fog is thick, drivers report seeing buildings where no buildings should be. A cluster of structures that look decades out of date, with people standing in doorways, watching, waiting. Milstead is still there, still trapping, still growing its population one visitor at a time. And Robert Hayes is still there too, still trying to escape, still warning others away, trapped forever in a town that refuses to die. The Appalachian mountains hide places that exist outside normal space and time, places where the rules change and escape becomes impossible. Milstead is one of them, a ghost town that won't accept being abandoned, that feeds on travelers, that creates prisons from geography itself. Robert fought as long as he could, and maybe he's still fighting, still walking those impossible roads, still trying to find a way out. But Milstead is patient. It has all the time in the world, and eventually everyone stops fighting, everyone except Robert. Stop. He won't surrender. And somewhere in those mountains, in a town that shouldn't exist, a security guard in a uniform walks endless roads, looking for an exit that keeps moving, refusing to become one more empty-eyed resident of Milstead. His war isn't over. It will never be over. That's his curse and his salvation, eternal struggle against a place that demands surrender. Robert Hayes will walk forever before he stops fighting, and the mountains watch, patient and hungry, waiting for the day he finally gives up. Story 9. The Convoy. Mitchell Grant had been driving tandem loads with his younger brother Ryan for 7 years, the two of them operating as a team hauling freight across the eastern United States. They developed a rhythm over the years, taking turns behind the wheel, communicating via CB radio, watching out for each other on the long hauls through the night. Their routes sometimes took them through the Appalachian Mountains, and they'd learned to respect the challenges those roads presented: steep grades, sudden weather changes, and long stretches of isolation. On a cold January night, Mitchell and Ryan were hauling refrigerated trailers loaded with produce from Georgia to Pennsylvania. Mitchell was in the lead truck, Ryan following a quarter-mile behind. They were traveling north on Route 23 through Virginia, through a section of highway that wound through the mountains with few lights and almost no other traffic at this late hour. It was around 2 a.m. when Mitchell noticed the headlights behind Ryan's truck. At first, he didn't think much of it, just another vehicle on the highway. But as he watched in his mirrors, more headlights appeared, and more. Within minutes, Mitchell counted 12 sets of headlights, all following in a tight line behind Ryan's truck. "Ryan, you seeing this convoy that just joined us?" Mitchell asked over the CB. "Yeah, I see them," Ryan replied. "Came out of nowhere. Haven't passed any on ramps or side roads where they could have merged." Mitchell frowned. Ryan was right. They'd been on an unbroken stretch of highway for 20 miles. No intersections, no entrance ramps, nowhere for a dozen vehicles to suddenly appear from. But there they were, following in perfect formation, maintaining exact spacing between each vehicle. "They're hauling ass," Ryan said. "Closing distance, going at least 80. Mitchell watched as the convoy of vehicles caught up to Ryan's truck and then stopped. They didn't pass, didn't slow down gradually, just matched Ryan's speed exactly and held their positions. The lead vehicle was now directly behind Ryan's trailer, the others strung out in a precise line. "That's weird," Ryan said. "Leader S practically kissing my bumper. Why don't they pass?" "Maybe they will once we hit a passing zone," Mitchell suggested, though unease was building in his chest. Something about this convoy felt wrong. They drove for another 10 miles, the mysterious convoy maintaining formation behind Ryan. Mitchell tried to get a better look at the vehicles in his mirrors, but his headlights weren't strong enough to illuminate them clearly. They appeared to be mixed: trucks, cars, maybe a bus or RV. Different sizes, but all maintaining that same precise spacing and speed. "Try radioing them," Mitchell suggested. "See who they are." Ryan keyed his CB. "This is the second truck in the line of 13 vehicles northbound on Route 23. To the convoy behind me, please identify yourselves. You're following awful close. Over." No response, just static. Ryan tried again. "Convoy behind me on Route 23, this is the truck you're following. Please respond." Over. Static. Then very faintly, Mitchell heard something in the static, a sound like wind or breathing or both. "You hear that?" Ryan asked. "Yeah," Mitchell said. "Let them pass, Ryan. Slow down and let them go around." Ryan reduced his speed from 65 to 55 miles per hour. The convoy slowed with him, maintaining exact distance. Ryan slowed further down to 45. The convoy matched him again. The vehicles behind never tried to pass, never deviated from their formation. "Mitch, this is creeping me out," Ryan said, real fear entering his voice. "They're not trying to pass. They're just following." Mitchell's unease had become genuine alarm. This wasn't normal driver behavior. No one would follow this closely, this precisely, without attempting to pass or at least communicating. "Speed up," he said. "Try to outrun them." Ryan accelerated, his truck climbing to 70 miles per hour, pushing the limit for a safe speed on these mountain curves. The convoy matched his speed effortlessly, the tight formation never wavering. Whatever these vehicles were, they had no trouble keeping pace. "They're still on me," Ryan said, breathing hard. "Not gaining, not falling back, just there." Mitchell was trying to think logically, trying to come up with an explanation. A military convoy, maybe. But military convoys announced themselves, used light codes, followed rules of the road. A truck club traveling together. But why wouldn't they respond to CB calls or attempt to pass? "Next exit," Mitchell said. "We're getting off this highway, take the exit and let's see if they follow." 5 miles ahead, they saw a sign for a rest area. Mitchell took the exit, following. Mitchell watched his mirrors intently. Would the convoy continue on the highway? No. All 12 vehicles took the exit in perfect formation, following Ryan down the off-ramp. "They're still with us," Ryan said, panic clear in his voice now. "Mitch, what the fuck is going on?" Mitchell pulled into the rest area parking lot and maneuvered his truck into a space. Ryan pulled in next to him. And the convoy. They pulled in behind Ryan, all 12 vehicles filling the parking spaces in a neat double row, their engines idling, their headlights still on. Mitchell climbed down from his cab, his heart pounding. Ryan joined him, the two brothers standing between their trucks, staring at the convoy. Up close, the vehicles looked old, decades old. A mix of 1960s and 70s era cars, pickup trucks, even a vintage tour bus. But despite their age, they all appeared pristine, as if they just rolled off showroom floors. "Stay here," Mitchell said. "I'm going to check them out." "Mitch, don't." But Mitchell was already walking toward the lead vehicle, a brown sedan with tail fins. He approached the driver's side window, trying to see inside. The windows were darkened, but as Mitchell got closer, the darkness seemed wrong, too absolute, too deep, like looking into a void. He knocked on the window. "Hello, everything all right?" No response. No movement from inside the vehicle. Mitchell tried the door handle, locked. He moved to the next vehicle, a pickup truck, and tried its door, also locked. He went down the line, trying every door, knocking on every window. Every vehicle was locked, every window impenetrable, no sign of any occupants. But the engines were running. Mitchell could hear them, could smell exhaust, could feel vibrations through the pavement. These were operational vehicles with their engines on and their lights burning, but no one was inside them. "Mitch, come back," Ryan called. "This isn't right. Let's just get back on the highway and go." Mitchell hurried back to his brother. "There's nobody in them, Ryan. The vehicles are running, but there's no one inside." "That's impossible," Ryan said. "Somebody has to be." The headlights changed. All 12 vehicles flashed their high beams on and off, 3 times in perfect synchronization. Then the lead vehicle revved its engine, a deep, threatening rumble. "Get in the truck," Mitchell said. "Now." The brothers climbed into their respective cabs and started their engines. Mitchell pulled out of his parking space and headed for the exit that would return them to the highway. Ryan followed. Behind them, the convoy of ghost vehicles pulled out in formation, following. "They're still with us," Ryan reported. "Mitch, what are we going to do?" Mitchell's mind raced. Run these things that had been proven. They couldn't reason with them or scare them off. So what could they do? "Find a populated area," Mitchell said. "Other people, other vehicles. Maybe these things won't follow us into crowds." But it was 2:30 in the morning, and they were deep in the Virginia mountains. The next town of any size was at least 50 miles away. Could they make it that far with this convoy following them? They got back on Route 23 and continued north, the 12 vehicles resuming their positions behind Ryan. Mitchell pushed his speed up to 70, Ryan matching him, both trucks working hard on the uphill grades and hurtling dangerously fast down the downhill sections. The convoy kept pace, never falling behind, those headlights constant in Ryan's mirrors. "Mitch, I just realized something," Ryan said. "Count the vehicles behind me." Mitchell counted. 12. "Why?" "Count again." Mitchell did. His blood went cold. 13. "There are 13 now." "Another one joined while we were moving," Ryan said. "I saw it. It just appeared out of nowhere, materialized between the 5th and 6th vehicles." As they watched, another vehicle appeared in the convoy, then another. The line of ghost vehicles was growing, their ranks swelling as they pursued the brothers through the night. "They're multiplying," Ryan said, his voice breaking. "Mitch, they're fucking multiplying." Mitchell's terror was complete. This wasn't just a strange convoy following them. This was something supernatural, something impossible. And it was growing stronger, drawing more of itself from whatever place these things came from. "The next town," Mitchell said, forcing his voice steady. "We make it to the next town. Population, lights, witnesses. This ends when we're not alone anymore." They drove. 10 miles. 15. 20. The convoy behind Ryan had swelled to 30 vehicles now, an impossible procession of vintage cars and trucks, all following with perfect precision, all empty, all impossible. Then Mitchell saw the lights ahead, the glow of a town on the horizon. "There," he shouted into the CB. "We're almost there, just hold on, Ryan." They came over a rise and the town spread before them. A small place, but with lit streets and buildings that showed signs of life. Mitchell took the exit, and as his truck left the highway, he watched his mirrors intently. The convoy didn't follow. The 30 ghost vehicles continued north on Route 23, maintaining their formation, their headlights disappearing into the darkness beyond the town. They didn't slow, didn't exit, just continued on as if Mitchell and Ryan had never existed. Ryan pulled up next to Mitchell at a gas station. Both brothers climbed out, their legs shaking, and leaned against Mitchell. "Did that really happen?" Ryan asked. "Tell me that really happened." "It happened," Mitchell confirmed. "I don't know what it was, but it happened." They stayed in that town until sunrise, neither willing to get back on Route 23 in the darkness. They called their dispatcher, reported a delay due to road conditions, and waited for daylight. When morning came, they continued their route north, hyper-aware of every vehicle around them, jumping at every set of headlights that appeared in their mirrors. But the convoy didn't return. Mitchell and Ryan researched the phenomenon later. They found stories scattered across trucker forums and paranormal websites, reports of mysterious convoys in the Appalachian mountains, vehicles that appeared from nowhere and followed drivers for miles before vanishing. Some reports mentioned ghost cars from different eras. Others described trucks or buses. Most described the vehicles as being empty but somehow driven, controlled by something unseen. One theory suggested the convoys were composed of vehicles whose drivers had died in accidents on these mountain roads, spectral machines still traveling their final routes, unable to accept that their journeys had ended. Another theory proposed they were tears in time, allowing vehicles from the past to appear briefly in the present, drawn to the living drivers like moths to flame. Mitchell found one account that chilled him deeply. A driver in West Virginia reported being followed by a similar convoy. He tried to outrun them and lost control on a curve. His truck had gone over an embankment. He survived, but barely. And as rescue workers pulled him from the wreck, he claimed the convoy had stopped at the top of the embankment, all those empty vehicles with their headlights shining down on him. Then they'd driven away. "They wanted me to join them," the driver had written. "I could feel it. If I died in that crash, my truck would have become part of the convoy. I'd be one of those empty vehicles, following other drivers through the night, trying to make them crash, trying to add them to our number." Mitchell and Ryan still drive together, still haul freight through the Appalachians. But they avoid Route 23 in Virginia, reroute around that particular section of highway. And they watch their mirrors constantly, especially at night, looking for headlights that follow too closely, that maintain two perfect formation that never try to pass. Because they know the convoy is still out there, still prowling the mountain roads, still growing. Every accident adds to its numbers. Every death on those highways creates another empty vehicle to join the spectral procession. The convoy is patient. It drives through endless night, waiting for the living to enter its path, waiting to test them, to chase them, to perhaps claim them. Mitchell and Ryan escaped, but they know they were lucky, and they know that other drivers won't be as fortunate. The convoy finds new prey every night, appears behind unsuspecting travelers, and begins its silent pursuit. Most escape, some don't, and those who don't, they join the ranks of the ghost vehicles, adding their machines to the endless procession through the Appalachian darkness. The mountains remember every journey that ended in tragedy, every life that ended on their roads. And in some places, under certain conditions, those journeys continue. The dead keep driving, following the living, inviting them to join a convoy that never reaches its destination, that travels forever through the night. Mitchell watches his mirrors. Ryan watches his mirrors. Both brothers know that one night on some dark road, those headlights might appear again. And if they do, the chase will resume. The convoy never forgets. It never gives up. It just waits for another chance, another night, another pair of drivers to follow through the endless Appalachian darkness. The road goes on forever in these mountains, and so does the convoy. Story 10. The Mountain That Watches. Carla Simmons had been a wildlife biologist before she started driving trucks, and that background made her more observant than most drivers. She noticed details that others missed: animal behavior, weather patterns, the way forests changed with elevation and season. She'd taken up trucking after her research funding dried up, needing steady income while she looked for another position in her field. She'd been driving for 3 years now, mostly runs through Appalachia, and she'd seen plenty of strange things in these ancient mountains. But nothing had prepared her for Raven's Peak. The job came through a specialized logistics company that handled deliveries to remote research stations and government facilities. Carla would be hauling equipment, whether monitoring instruments, communication gear, and supplies, to a meteorological station on Raven's Peak in eastern Tennessee. The station was accessible only via an unmarked private road that wound 20 miles up the mountain from the nearest highway. The delivery coordinator had been oddly specific in his instructions. "You'll need to arrive during daylight hours," he'd said. "The road is difficult and not well marked. And Ms. Simmons, don't stop on the mountain. Under any circumstances, don't stop the truck until you reach the station." "Why not?" Carla had asked. The coordinator had paused. "The mountain doesn't like to be studied too closely. The scientists will explain more when you arrive." It was a strange warning, but Carla had heard stranger things in her years of research work. Remote stations often developed odd customs and superstitions. She accepted the job and set out from Knoxville on a clear April morning. She found the turnoff exactly where the coordinator had indicated, an unmarked gravel road that broke off from State Route 67, and immediately began climbing. Carla shifted her truck into low gear and started the ascent. The road was indeed difficult, steep, narrow, and winding, carved into the mountainside with minimal grading. Carla had to navigate switchbacks barely wide enough for her truck, and several times she had to stop and back up to make tight turns. But what really captured her attention was the forest around her. It was wrong, subtly but definitely wrong. Carla had spent years studying Appalachian ecosystems. She knew what was normal for these elevations and seasons, but the trees here didn't follow expected patterns. Species that shouldn't grow together were mixed in impossible combinations. Trees showed growth patterns that defied normal biology, branches all oriented in the same direction, as if blown by constant wind, but in different directions on different parts of the mountain. Some trees were enormous, far larger than their species typically grew. Others were stunted, twisted, malformed. and everything was watching her. Carla knew that was an irrational thought, but she couldn't shake it. The trees seemed to track her truck as it climbed. Animals, deer, birds, even insects stopped what they were doing and turned to watch as she passed. It wasn't the normal alertness of prey animals hearing a vehicle. It was focused, intent observation, as if the entire mountain ecosystem was studying her. She'd been driving for about an hour, climbing steadily, when she noticed something that made her hit the brakes. Then she remembered the coordinator's warning, "Don't stop." She forced her foot back onto the accelerator, but her eyes stayed fixed on what she'd seen. There were patterns carved into the trees. All along the road, every tree bore marks, symbols or letters or something that looked like writing but wasn't any alphabet Carla recognized. The carvings were old, weathered by years or decades, but they covered every trunk within sight. Thousands of marks, creating a continuous text that wrapped the entire mountain. Carla's training as a scientist warred with her growing fear. This was extraordinary, potentially significant. Someone or something had spent years, maybe generations, carving messages into every tree on this mountain. She wanted to stop to photograph the marks to study them. But the coordinator's warning echoed in her mind, "Don't stop." She drove on. The higher she climbed, the stranger things became. The road passed through a section of forest where every tree was dead, not recently dead, but ancient dead, petrified trunks that should have collapsed long ago but instead stood upright, forming a gray forest of stone. Each dead tree still bore the same carved symbols, cut so deeply they'd been preserved in the petrified wood. Then Carla saw the first watcher. It stood among the stone trees, about 30 yards from the road, a figure roughly human-shaped but wrong in every proportion. Too tall, too thin, limbs too long, head too large. It stood perfectly still, and Carla couldn't determine if it was a statue, a peculiarly shaped tree, or something else. But as her truck passed, the figure's head turned to follow her, smoothly, deliberately tracking her movement. Carla's hands tightened on the wheel. She wanted to accelerate to get past this section of road as quickly as possible, but the grade was too steep and the switchbacks too tight. She had to maintain her crawling pace while more watchers appeared among the dead trees. She counted 12 of them, all with that same wrong shape, all turning to watch her truck pass. The CB radio crackled to life, though Carla hadn't heard any signal since starting up the mountain. A voice came through, distorted, strange, but definitely human. "Almost there. Keep driving. Don't stop. Don't look too closely. The mountain is aware." Carla grabbed her CB mic. "This is Mountain Express hauling equipment to Ravens Peak Station. Who am I speaking with?" "Dr. Reeves at the station. We're tracking your progress. You're doing well. Just keep moving. Another 30 minutes to reach us." "What are those things standing in the trees?" Carla demanded. "What's written on all the bark? What is this place?" "Static." "Then, the mountain. It's difficult to explain. We study it, but we don't understand it. No one does." The government established this station in 1962 to observe the phenomenon. 62 years of research, and we're no closer to understanding. Understanding what? That Ravens Peak is alive, conscious, aware. It watches everyone who enters its space, and it communicates. Carla's scientific mind rebelled against this explanation. Mountains weren't alive, weren't conscious. This had to be some geological or ecological phenomenon that appeared supernatural. But even as she formed that thought, she knew it wasn't true. She could feel the mountain's attention on her, could sense its enormous awareness focused on her tiny truck crawling up its slope. "The symbols on the trees," Dr. Reeves continued. "We call them the scripture. They appeared over the course of about 40 years, from roughly 1910 to 1950. People who lived on the mountain would find themselves compelled to carve them. Different people, different locations, but all carving the same symbols in the same sequence, creating a continuous text that spirals from the base of the mountain to its peak." "What does it say?" Carla asked. "We don't know. We've photographed the entire scripture, fed it into every decryption and translation system available. It doesn't match any known language, living or dead, but the people who carved it understood. They claimed the mountain was teaching them that the symbols contained all knowledge, the fundamental truth of existence. Most went insane. Some vanished. A few burned down their houses with themselves inside, choosing death over what they'd learned. Carla's truck had climbed above the dead forest now, entering an area of living trees again. But these were even stranger, ancient hemlocks and oaks that must have been growing for centuries, their trunks so massive her truck seemed toy-like by comparison. And every trunk was carved, every surface covered with the scripture. "The watchers you saw," Dr. Reeves said. "We don't know what they are. Manifestations of some kind, maybe. Physical representations of the mountain's attention. They appear and disappear. They move when no one's looking. Sometimes there are dozens, sometimes none for months. They've never harmed anyone as far as we know. They just observe. Has anyone tried to remove them, study them? Yes, they can't be removed. They're not separate objects. They're part of the mountain itself, like stone growing in human-shaped patterns. Cut one and it bleeds sap. Wound one and the entire mountain reacts. We learned early not to damage them." Carla crested a ridge, and suddenly the forest opened up. She found herself on a plateau near the mountain's peak, and there stood the research station, a cluster of modular buildings surrounded by various instruments and antennas. 3 people waited near the station's entrance, waving her toward a parking area. Carla pulled up and set her brakes, relief flooding through her. She demade it. Whatever weirdness permeated this mountain, she'd deliver her cargo and get back down before dark. Dr. Reeves was a woman in her 50s with gray hair and intense eyes. She shook Carla's hand. "Thank you for not stopping. Some drivers can't help themselves. They stop to examine the screen or approach the watchers. It complicates things." "What happens if someone stops?" Carla asked. Dr. Reeves gestured to the mountain around them. "The mountain engages with them more directly, shows them things. Most people who stop on the road and spend time examining the phenomena end up confused, disoriented. Some refuse to leave. We've had to remove drivers forcibly, get them psychiatric care. The mountain wants people to understand it, but human minds aren't built for what it's trying to communicate." Carla helped unload her cargo while the researchers explained more about Raven's Peak. The mountain, they said, appeared to be a single organism, not just the geological formation, but the entire ecosystem on it, all connected in ways science couldn't explain. The trees, the animals, even the soil and stone, all seemed to share a unified awareness. The scripture was its attempt to communicate, to express concepts it observed in the universe. The watchers were its eyes, focused points of attention. "Why don't people know about this?" Carla asked. "This should be world famous." "It is in certain circles," Dr. Reeves said, "but the government doesn't want public knowledge. Can you imagine what would happen? Religious groups claiming it's proof of God or Satan. New Age types trying to commune with it. Entrepreneurs trying to monetize it. Scientists swarming the area. The mountain might not react well to that much attention. And people exposed to the scripture for extended periods often break down mentally. This place is dangerous to human psychology." Carla finished her delivery and prepared to leave. Dr. Reeves walked her back to her truck. "On your way down, same rules apply. Don't stop. Keep moving. The descent is faster but also more dangerous. The mountain will try harder to get your attention going down. Resist." "Why?" Carla asked. "What does it want?" "To be understood," Dr. Reeves said simply. "It's been trying for centuries, maybe longer. Using every method it can conceive, carved messages, physical manifestations, alterations to its ecosystem. All attempts to communicate, but human consciousness and mountain consciousness are too different. We can't understand each other, and that frustrates it." Carla started her engine and began the descent. Dr. Reeves had been right. Going down was more difficult. The road seemed narrower somehow, the switchbacks tighter. And the mountain's presence felt more intense, more demanding. Carla could feel it pressing against her mind, feel it trying to show her things to make her understand. The watchers lined the road now, dozens of them standing at the edge of the forest, all facing her truck, all its movement. Carla kept her eyes on the road, resisting the urge to look too closely at them, to stop and examine their features. Halfway down the mountain, Carla saw something that made her breath catch. In a clearing beside the road, visible for just a moment, was a structure. Not a natural formation, but something built. A massive construction of stone and wood, covered in the scripture, rising maybe 100 feet high. It looked ancient, older than human civilization in North America, and it pulsed with a subtle luminescence. Carla wanted to stop, wanted to photograph it, wanted to radio the research station and ask if they knew about this structure. But she didn't. She kept driving, the image burning into her memory. When she finally reached the bottom of the mountain and turned back onto State Route 67, Carla felt like she could breathe again. The oppressive sense of being watched lifted. Her mind cleared. She drove back to Knoxville and filed her delivery report, noting nothing unusual. But she couldn't stop thinking about Raven's Peak, about the scripture covering every tree, about the watchers standing in the forest, about that massive structure she'd glimpsed. That night, Carla dreamed. In the dream, she stood on Raven's Peak and could read the scripture. It made perfect sense, every symbol clear, every message understood. And what it said was beautiful and terrible, truths about the nature of consciousness, about the universe's structure, about the thin membrane between life and non-life, about how awareness could emerge from anything given sufficient time and connection. She woke crying, the meanings already fading from her mind like water through a sieve. Her human brain couldn't hold what she'd understood in the dream. It slipped away, leaving only the emotional residue: awe, terror, longing. Carla never took another delivery to Raven's Peak, but she thinks about it constantly, wondering what message the mountain is trying to convey, what understanding it's desperate to share. She's tempted to go back, to hike up that mountain and spend time with the scripture, to let the mountain show her what it wants her to know. But she remembers Dr. Reeves's warnings about mental breakdown, about people who spent too long trying to understand and went mad from the attempt. Some kinds of knowledge aren't meant for human minds. Some consciousness operates on scales too vast for individual humans to grasp without shattering. Raven's Peak watches still, carving its endless message into every available surface, creating manifestations to observe those who enter its domain, trying desperately to be understood by minds too small and brief to comprehend it. And it's cursed to be eternally aware, eternally conscious, but forever unable to communicate with the tiny, fleeting creatures that crawl across its slopes. Carla drives other routes now, through other mountains. But she knows Raven's Peak is still there, still watching, still waiting. And sometimes, late at night, she thinks she can feel its attention on her even hundreds of miles away. Can feel it remembering the driver who came and left, who saw but didn't understand, who carried away a glimpse of its truth but couldn't hold it. The mountain is patient. It's been alive for millennia, will live for millennia more. It can wait for understanding. It can keep trying, keep carving, keep watching. Because what else can a conscious mountain do but seek connection? Seek to share what it knows, seek to bridge the gap between its ancient awareness and the brief flickers of human consciousness that pass through its realm. Carla escaped Raven's Peak, but part of her will always be there, standing among the carved trees, trying to read the scripture, trying to understand what the mountain so desperately wants to tell her. That's the price of witnessing something vast and inexplicable. You carry it with you forever. A weight of unfinished knowledge, of truth glimpsed but not grasped. The Appalachian Mountains hold many secrets, but Raven's Peak holds the deepest one of all, proof that consciousness isn't limited to what we recognize as life. That awareness can emerge from stone and soil and ancient trees, that the mountains themselves might be watching us with eyes we can't perceive, trying to speak in languages we can't understand. And somewhere in Tennessee, a mountain continues its vigil, carving messages, creating watchers, hoping that someday someone will finally understand what it's been trying to say all along.